Welcome to the fantasy audiobook. Get lost, you witch. Don't even think about letting me have a baby with you again. Chapter 61. In addition to her stunning beauty and slender figure, Paizinan has many things that make men annoying. Domineering personality, moody, self and conceited. If you are slightly unhappy, you will use your power to overwhelm others without showing any consideration. What's more, there are some weird XPs that even some group friends think are perverted. If you pick these, you can list a whole page of details. No one is the same. But if it wasn't like this, how could she be known as a witch? But sometimes, Paizinan, this witch girl, seems to have no witchy nature at all. Just like just now, she, Paizinan, not only accepted all Li Qingming's difficulties, but even got really angry at the end, and used it like this. The way the younger daughter gestures. After the lips separated, it took Li Qingming a long time to realize. Isn't this the scene in the previous martial arts costume dramas where the heroine feeds the hero medicine? I remember back then, all the friends in the orphanage were blushing and covering their eyes while watching this scene on the TV through the gaps between their fingers. Which boy has not dreamed of being a hero, and which boy has not had the urge to chop Yin Jipping into pieces? Now, his childhood dream was coming true in a different way. After being surprised, Li Qingming felt a little itchy in his heart and his lips felt a little dry. Just a small sip, how can it be enough? Still thirsty. Li Qingming replied indifferently, without showing anything strange, and did not look at Paizinan again. His tone was still weak. After all, he was a righteous monk, and he still had to put up some airs. How could he know that Paizinan was also shocked, thinking how could he do such a thing? How can I, a magnificent seductress, imitate those stupid women who accomplish nothing but blush? What shocked her even more was that Li Qingming dared to say he was thirsty. Looking at the full water glass in his hand, Paizinan, as free and easy as he was, hesitated on the spot. It is absolutely impossible for her to continue the mouth-to-mouth feeding just now. How could Paizinan, the majestic witch, be able to do such a thing? Even if you do it, it's only once. Don't even think about it. Don't even think about it happening a second time. She handed the cup over and tilted her wrist. If you're thirsty, drink it yourself. Looking down at the rim of the cup beside his lips, Li Qingming moved his lips and took a small sip. Inexplicably, he felt that the spiritual spring had no taste at all. It's tasteless to the extreme. It's really strange. The mouthful just now was moist and sweet, but why did it suddenly lose its taste? Li Qingming said this sentence with an unintentional look on his face. Then he looked serious, as if he was really thinking about what caused this situation. Paizinan was startled, and then remembered that the little guy insisted on letting her taste Li Qingming's sweet mouth a few days ago. She tasted it, and it felt a little sweet. How come it's so sweet now that it's on her lips? My mouth is really sweet. Paizinan raised a question in his heart. The atmosphere became tense again without realizing it. One person was lying there without speaking, and the other was standing here holding a cup in silence. Ahem. After a while, Li Qingming broke the silence with a cough. He licked the rim of the cup with his lips, and then, taking a breath of air, why is the water so cold? Paizinan frowned and touched it a few times with his fingers, and the remaining warmth was clear. How's the ice? She asked. It's just a bit icy. Then I'll get another drink. Paizinan tried his best to stay more patient. Ahem, will it be a little troublesome? Trouble? Are you aware of the trouble at this time? Paizinan couldn't help but sneered coldly, lowered his head slightly, and waited quietly for Li Qingming's counterattack. But after waiting for a long time, she only said, then it's better not to be troublesome. Paizinan was slightly stunned again. She had seen him be so intimate and considerate several times, but it was only when he faced other people. To her, Li Qingming was as despicable as he could be, and as annoying as he could be. Paizinan never knew where his bottom line was. Only, after a moment of silence, Paizinan asked, what should we do? Li Qingming paused for a moment, maybe feeling a little guilty, and hesitantly said, why not, just like that? The air suddenly became quiet again, and there was a little more embarrassment. Li Qingming didn't think there was anything wrong. He was seriously injured and paralyzed in bed and needed to recuperate. It wasn't too much to let the enchantress serve him for a while, right? Too much. That's too much. Not too much at all. Li Qingming successfully convinced himself, but he still had no confidence in his heart. With Pei Xinan's temperament, how could he? Before the word, "what," appeared in his mind, his thoughts were interrupted by the tenderness on his lips. Why is this spiritual spring so sweet? Li Qingming's head was a little dizzy, but the taste buds on his tongue were transmitting signals to his brain one after another, making all the nerves in his body gradually become excited. It's quite a bit like the rain comes after a long drought. After living for more than 20 years, he has never tasted such a sweet spiritual spring. After a while, he had time to breathe. But before he could catch his breath, Li Qingming smacked his mouth again. It's too sweet, and I'm suddenly thirsty again. After he finished speaking, he also secretly cast a glance at Pei Xinan, and saw that the latter's face was completely expressionless, and he just handed the cup over again. She is absolutely impossible to go against her decision again and again. Pei Xinan's mind was as firm as ever. He said it only once, and that was just that time. There will definitely never be a third time. She swears. Seeing Pei Xinan's expression in full view, Li Qingming secretly thought it was a pity. He drank 2 sips obediently, and then took 2 breaths of air conditioning. Because of the delay just now, this cup of spiritual spring water, which was already a bit cold, felt really chilly after drinking it. Pei Xinan twisted up those 2 eyebrows that resembled Lu Rojian's as if reflexively. After taking a sip, he realized that it was indeed a bit cold and said, "I'll get you another cup." "Don't you need to go to such trouble?" Li Qingming asked tentatively. Kissing was not a strange thing between the two of them, but every time it was a life and death fight. "I'm afraid that if I use too little force, I won't be able to suck the air out of the other person's mouth. There is no such sweet taste." As for repeating his old tricks, Li Qingming has no psychological burden. What's wrong with the boy having a little tea? All to better protect yourself. Seeing that Pei Xinan didn't respond for a long time, Li Qingming also sighed quietly. It's better not to drink anymore. I'll be a little thirsty and I'll be fine if I endure it. Li Qingming. Until now, Pei Xinan still didn't know what tricks this fool was playing, and he couldn't bear to drink. Then he said something that seemed very impatient. Only this one time. Contrast is the element that makes men most want to stop. Capturing the completely different side of Pei Xinan, Li Qingming also became a little addicted to the game, always wanting to test Pei Xinan's bottom line secretly. It was not appropriate to say that he was seeking death. It should be regarded as discovering a novel way to play with a certain toy. "It's a little cold, why don't you close the windows?" "Gone." "What's missing?" "The window is shattered." "Then close the door." "The door is gone too." Pei Xinan glanced at the messy inner room. Not only the windows, but also the doors were all gone, and the walls with various magic formations carved like magic treasures were also cracked like spider webs. More than one word can describe it: miserable. The window was gone, the door was gone, and Li Qingming had no reason to call Pei Xinan. He couldn't help but feel a little scratchy in his heart, and coughed a few times. "It's cold." Pei Xinan once again suppressed the irritability in his heart, always feeling that he was much worse now than when Pei Zulu was born. "After taking care of the younger one, why do you need to take care of the older one today?" Pei Xinan curled his fingers and flicked them again, and set up a magic circle around him. The cold air from the rain outside could no longer drift in. She was indeed negligent in this matter. Then put on an extra layer of quilt. Pei Xinan took out a quilt that looked like clouds and running water from the storage. A monk would not need these common things, but he would never wrong himself. He would only use them. Better and more expensive. What's more, no woman can refuse to hold a quilt that is fluffy and warm in winter and cold in summer, and sleep with it between her legs. As soon as the quilt was taken out, another fragrance suddenly filled the room. It's all about Pei Xinan's unique fragrance. Being covered by this quilt, Li Qingming felt as if several Pei Xinan were pressing on him. Pei Xinan on the whole bed. Somehow, Li Qingming felt slightly excited. "It's still cold, my hands are cold." Pei Xinan, who had already decided not to listen to any of Li Qingming's lies, didn't even frown. She really, truly would never be fooled again. But the next second, Pei Xinan still touched Li Qingming's palm, which was indeed a little cold. "Lang, don't you just put it under the quilt. It'll still be cold." Then what else do you want from me? It's okay, you just want to warm my hands. Just to warm your hands. Why did I lie to you? Pei Zinan hesitated for a moment. If it was just to warm her hands, it wouldn't be a big deal. She sat down on the bedside and clasped Li Qingming's exposed hand with both hands, but then she heard him say, "It's not like this. That's that again. Li Qingming, don't you really think that you are just injured, and I, Pei Zinan, must obey your words?" Pei Zinan became angry immediately. But the next second, he stopped abruptly. Just because her chest suddenly felt cold. Then there was the visible rise and fall of the clothes, and Pei Zinan stared at Li Qingming, as if he wanted to tear him into pieces. "This is what you, the upright swordsman Li Qingming, said, warm your hands." "Hey, isn't that what it is?" Li Qingming said righteously, with a smile on his face. "Isn't it just to warm your hands by putting your hands in a warm place?" But his pride and calmness only lasted for a moment. "No, Pei Zinan, you, daughter, they're people who eat tofu like you, right?" "Huh, what? You are allowed to warm your hands, but I can't." Different from Li Qingming's joy and suffering, Zhang Yunqing, who had just learned the news over there, was already really red-eyed, and his murderous intention was as real as ever. He made all the spiritual birds and beasts outside her cave hide in the cave, trembling, for fear of provoking this unreasonable disaster. "You're just a witch, how dare you insult my senior brother Qingming?" Although the spectators last night did not know the cause and effect of the incident, they also knew which witch girl actually captured Li Qingming and openly showed her body at the border of Zion Peak, attracting the returning Yu Baiwei to pursue her. But these are enough for them to make up some rumors. When Li Qingming's innocence was tainted by the enchantress, his mentor Yu Baiwei became furious and chopped the enchantress into pieces. What was once a so-called young swordsman had already secretly had an affair with a witch, and this time he was about to be cleared out by his master. There are many kinds of things, but they are really true to the facts. How could Zhang Yunqing believe it at all? My senior brother Qingming has never agreed to practice dual cultivation with me, so how can I see such a bullshit witch? I am married to senior brother Qingming's daughter. As her mother-in-law, how can I be deceived by these rumors? No, I have to visit senior brother Qingming first. Zhang Yunqing didn't waste a moment and went to Li Qingming's courtyard in Linan City. She thought that since Yu Baiwei was here, Li Qingming was naturally fine. She couldn't possibly be lazily watching the water splash under the eaves at this time. Just like when she was a child. But when she arrived in the courtyard, she didn't find any trace of Li Qingming. She only saw Pei Zulu lying in the arms of a broad-minded woman. Zhang Yunqing frowned for a moment. She respected Yu Baiwei from the bottom of her heart and regarded her as her closest sister, but there was only one thing she didn't like. Although he is a master, he always has to be taken care of by his disciples. And, so close. Forget it before, now the little one is willing to call me a Niang. Is it inappropriate for you, Sister Yu, to still hold her like this? In other words, this innocent and transparent noble daughter of the Zhang family is also a little jealous. She has been jealous of Yu Baiwei, who has a close relationship with Li Qingming since she was a child, and vaguely regards her as her #1 enemy. Little guy. When he got closer, Zhang Yunqing called softly. Hearing the sound, Pei Zulu raised his head, turned his head twice and saw the sister Piao Niang who had been written down in her notebook, and immediately fell to the ground. Sister, sister, she shouted twice, then changed her words, little sister, little sister. When I think about it, there are so many sisters, and it's easy for her to be confused if she doesn't distinguish them, so I just use their characteristics to distinguish them. Big shout out to big sister. The little one calls me little sister. My little guy is so smart. Zhang Yunqing was stunned. Although he didn't know why there were two more small characters in front of him today, he felt happy at the moment. The closer he got, the more special he would be called. Then he greeted Yu Baiwei. Long time no see, Sister Yu. Little Yunqing has grown up a bit, Yu Baiwei responded with a soft smile. She really treated this little pudding who had been following her and Li Qingming since childhood as a younger sister. But when these words fell in Zhang Yunqing's ears, they became some arrogant words. She couldn't help but cast her eyes on something plump, and then her breath froze. Lost. She lost again. Even if you hold your chest up, it's still incomparable. I'll get you some tea, Yu Baiwei didn't notice these little thoughts and turned around to go to the back room. But the clever little guy saw some clues. Who told her to care about this very much? Little miss, little miss. She took Zhang Yunqing's hand. What's the matter? Seeing the little guy, Zhang Yunqing calmed down slightly, but then he felt like he was struck by lightning and couldn't help himself. Pei Zulu patted the back of her hand and said comfortingly, "Little sister, don't be sad. It's small, but also very cute." Pei Zulu really wanted to comfort this little lady. Just like Zhang Yunqing usually does, no matter how straightforward or true the words he speaks, they are sharp arrows that poke people's hearts. It's small, but it's also cute. But compared to Yu Baiwei, who can hold a great title, she still lost. Total loss. But she, Zhang Yunqing, has always had a temperament that refuses to admit defeat. What's more, since she was a child, she has always been extremely concerned about the gap between herself and Yu Baiwei, wishing she could be better than her in every aspect. In terms of cultivation, she worked several times harder than the latter, but there is still a long way to go in their cultivation. In terms of caring for Li Qingming, she considered herself to be far more caring than Yu Baiwei. In the past 2 years, she had worked hard to treat Li Qingming 100 times 1,000 times better. She was extremely confident and thought it was only a matter of time. Only in this aspect, she really feels a little powerless. There are naturally techniques similar to shaping the body in the spiritual world, but if she uses it, doesn't it mean that not only does she lose, but she is also as jealous as ordinary women? She would rather lose than use these unrealistic tricks. To win, she must win openly, and to lose, she must lose openly. As for being convinced, it is naturally impossible. What does it mean that I am cute even though I am small? Then isn't her eldest sister the most adorable in the world? Little guy, tell your sister whether your father likes older ones, or like her. Zhang Yunqing paused, his face slightly red, but without any hesitation, such a small and cute. This question stopped Pei Zulu. She never asked Li Qingming, how could she know whether her father liked older ones or younger ones? But there is nothing in the world that can stop her from being so smart and witty. I like them all. The little guy responded crisply. Daddy is just like me, both the little ones and the big ones like them. One sentence instantly made Zhang Yunqing's cheeks turn redder, and his whole body felt a little erratic, as if he was stepping on soft cotton under his feet. Sure enough, senior brother Qingming has me in his heart. She could tell that all the little guy's words were spoken from the bottom of his heart. So between the little sister and the big sister, who do you like more? Women always like to take the trouble to get some satisfaction through comparison. He didn't hesitate to get to the bottom of things, and Zhang Yunqing was no exception. Well, Pei Zulu admitted that she was stumped. Fortunately, Yu Baiwei left and returned with tea, allowing her to avoid the problem openly. Big sister, I'll help you carry it, I'll help you carry it. As she spoke, she happily ran to show her courtesy, as if she was afraid that Yu Baiwei would be tired, which made the latter's eyes soften and her heart ripple slightly. If I could have a daughter, I think she would be so cute. As soon as this thought came up, Yu Baiwei stopped it abruptly. She smiled and rubbed the little guy's head, then turned to Zhang Yunqing and said, Xiao Yunqing, take a sip of tea first. The latter took it and corrected it. Sister Baiwei, I am no longer the child I used to be. One sentence somehow made Yu Baiwei fall into a brief confusion, and then fell into the cage that had firmly trapped her. Yes, it is no longer the past. Taking advantage of this gap, Zhang Yunqing looked at and compared openly, just glanced at it, and then withdrew his gaze. Compared with Yu Baiwei's body, the double-raised jade arms cannot fully cover her body, and the floating clouds still embrace the moon in the sky. Her own is really a bit petite. Zhang Yunqing will not be discouraged. What happened to Xu Fa Chuyun? She is still young, and it is normal for her to be small and exquisite. Sooner or later, the moon will be as full as a disk. Who knows who will win? After a short comparison, Zhang Yunqing collected his thoughts and asked directly, where is senior brother Qingming? Has he been injured in any way? As soon as she finished speaking, Yu Baiwei froze. Before she could speak, the little guy next to her had already stood up. Ah, Daddy, what's wrong? I was so panicked that I couldn't even speak coherently, and my tears were rolling around. It's nothing. Your father just caught a cold yesterday and rested for the night at Zion Peak. My sister forgot to tell you. Yu Baiwei hurriedly comforted her, forgetting what she said the whole morning about her master, his disciple, and his grandson. Call. Really, really, Pei Zinan even muttered in grievance. When she heard that her father was injured, she felt even sadder than when she was beaten by Pei Zinan. Yu Baiwei's gentle tone slightly weakened her sadness, but it could not resist her concern for Li Qingming. Sister, can I trouble you to take me to see my father? I miss my dad. Yu Baiwei glanced at Zhang Yunqing, who was silent like a child who made a mistake, and felt troubled. It was right to take the little guy to meet his disciple, but little Yunqing was here and would definitely go with him. She couldn't guarantee what trouble would happen by then. Zhang Yunqing has had an unexplainable paranoia towards Li Qingming since he was a child. If he meets Pei Zinan, it will be another matter. If his Taoist heart is broken, it will be extremely troublesome. When the time comes, the Zhang family will blame Li Qingming for this matter. As a master, how could she cause trouble to her disciple? Yu Baiwei's temperament is extremely lazy, but when it comes to Li Qingming, she will be extremely serious. Xiao Yunqing, Yu Baiwei said, I will take the little guy back to Xian Peak, and you can also go back to the Zhang family. Why, I also miss senior brother Qingming. Zhang Yunqing was confused and unwilling. She just said the wrong thing and made the little guy sad, but this did not prevent her from going to visit Li Qingming. It is internal affairs at Xian Peak. It is inconvenient for outsiders to be present today. Why am I an outsider? Zhang Yunqing's words stopped abruptly. She had only lived in Xian Peak for several years when she was a child, and was not from Xian Peak. But she then argued, even if as an outsider, it's not inappropriate for me to visit senior brother Qingming. Yunqing, now that you have grown up, you also know that you can no longer act as arbitrarily as you did when you were a child. Yu Baiwei did not let go. If you don't follow the rules, you won't be able to do anything. The atmosphere was vaguely tit for tat. I got it. Zhang Yunqing didn't force her in the end, and Yu Baiwei wouldn't do it without reason, so she gave in. She can't take care of Xian Peak's internal affairs now, but she will be able to take care of it in the future, so there is no rush at this moment. Waiting for Yu Baiwei to disappear with the little guy in her arms, Zhang Yunqing did not follow her, but just swept around the yard. She puffed up her chest and looked gradually confident. I am slightly defeated by Yu Baiwei, but it is only temporary. And besides you, is there any woman in the world who can make me lose? I, Zhang Yunqing, will never be weaker than anyone in my life. Daddy, are you okay? Woo woo woo. As soon as he arrived at Xian Peak and saw Li Qingming with a weak face, Pei Zulu ran into her father's arms with a flutter, and the tears flowed down his face. Li Qingming groaned and wanted to say that he was fine, but he couldn't breathe. Just with this flutter, he even felt that some of the bones in his body were cracking again. When Pei Zinan saw it, he lifted Pei Zulu up and said, don't cry again. The little guy who was in a high mood now ignored Pei Zinan and cried even louder. His limbs fluttered and asked Li Qingming to hold him. Daddy. Li Qingming couldn't stand it anymore, so he struggled to get up and reached out to pick it up. All problems between parents and children stem from insufficient communication, and this is the same for mothers and daughters. But it's not just Li Qingming who can't stand it either. Yu Baiwei, who also didn't want to see the little guy cry, said with a bit of nervousness, I'll hold him. As soon as she said this, she suddenly regretted it. Who am I qualified to interfere in the affairs of their family of three? Pei Zinan's eyes became sharper and sharper. Is my daughter the one you can hold if you want? The smell of gunpowder instantly filled the whole room, so pungent that even Li Qingming frowned and sighed. The scenes were similar, but he was still unable to do anything. On one side, the little guy's heart-wrenching cry was heard, and on the other side, there was the conflict between the demon girl and his master, which made Li Qingming a little hopeless. If they were hit again, not to mention the doors and windows, the house would also be gone. Yu Baiwei was suppressed by the momentum between Pei Zinan's few words, and her heart was full of unspeakable bitterness. According to seniority, I am also the ancestor of Xiao Zulu. If you are busy, I should take care of you. There is no need for you, an outsider, to worry. Pei Zinan was still a powder keg that could explode at the drop of a hat. The indifference on his face frightened the little guy. He forgot to cry for a moment and started brainstorming. What's going on? Is Anyang also jealous that my eldest sister is older than her? If they quarrel, who should I help? She was young and could not tell the root cause of this situation between the two people, but she could also sense that the atmosphere was becoming increasingly strange. After just a little thought, Pei Zulu felt that her head was a mess. Thinking was really not what she was good at, so she could only act according to instinct. After sniffing, Pei Zulu said, "Auntie, I want to drink Nana." A sentence of less than 10 words was like an icebreaker, breaking the atmosphere that had just filled most of the room. But what followed was an extremely strange silence. Only Li Qingming felt relieved. It's still my little treasure. Without you, this family will fall apart sooner or later. Seeing that Pei Zinan did not respond for a long time, Pei Zulu held his head high and shouted, "Mom, I want to drink Nana." His hands were still fluttering and he was about to hug Pei Zinan's waist, shouting, "Anyang, Nana, I want to drink Nana." The more she shouted, the uglier Pei Zinan's expression became, thinking that he had the upper hand in front of Yu Baiwei, but all his previous efforts were in vain because of his daughter's shout. Moreover, I still lost face. Pei Zinan cast a cold look at Yu Baiwei, and found that the latter was also spying on him, and even blushed slightly. This woman dared to make fun of me. Pei Zinan felt uneasy in her heart. She was afraid of falling out in front of Yu Baiwei, and she suddenly felt ashamed and annoyed. Looking down at the restless little guy who was flopping and crying like an octopus, Pei Zinan swung it towards Yu Baiwei. Ouch! Pei Zulu, who was spinning half a circle in the sky, couldn't help but scream. When he opened his eyes again, he found that he was in that fragrant and soft bosom, and he couldn't help but rub his head against it. She really likes this big heart. Only a pinch worse than her father's chest. If you want to drink, go to your master. Pei Zinan's eyes were pondering, knowing exactly how to make Yu Baiwei experience the embarrassment and shame she just felt. Yu Baiwei, she called, and her tone suddenly became extremely soft, as if she was talking to a friend. Didn't you just say that as the master, you should help take care of her? Yu Baiwei hesitated. Stop hesitating, are you Pei Zulu's master? I am. That's it, Pei Zinan said with a bright smile on his face, and his tone was full of gratitude. Then, as my master, please help me feed my little one. Yu Baiwei was silent. How could she, an inexperienced eldest daughter, listen to this? And, where did she come from? In just a few breaths, Yu Baiwei's face was as hot as a stove, and her chin almost touched her chest. The more silent she became, the more the corners of Pei Zinan's mouth rose. This was undoubtedly another great victory for her. I, Pei Zinan, have defeated you, Yu Baiwei once again. Silently listening to the conversation between the two, the little guy blinked several times in succession, wondering why his grandma was so good today. He even guessed what he was thinking. Big sister, big sister. Pei Zulu couldn't help but blink his big eyes, staring at Yu Baiwei eagerly, and even made a few swallowing movements in his throat. Obviously he is very greedy. As a result, the latter did not dare to respond to her gaze. How dare Yu Baiwei agree? But this look was very similar to the time when Li Qingming asked her for objects when he was a child, and she always agreed. At this time, I didn't feel disgusted, but thought that if I had it, I would just feed it. In the past, she was like a teacher and a mother, but now that she has been promoted to a higher level, there is actually not much difference. Pei Zinan, don't talk nonsense. Li Qingming looked at Yu Baiwei and felt a heavy weight on his chest. He couldn't help but speak with anger. But his anger did not bother Pei Zinan. She just said lightly and ignored Li Qingming, just rest peacefully. When did you, the man, need to intervene in our women's affairs? Li Qingming's chest rose and fell, but there was nothing he could do about this witch. He opened his mouth, but hesitated. Tired, destroy it. Pei Zinan, who had completely gained the upper hand, was extremely proud. He admired the Jojo Palace Sword Immortal's embarrassment and decided to add another fire. By the way, there is also your apprentice Li Qingming. Pei Zinan suddenly spoke, causing Yu Baiwei to pause again and turn his head to look at her. I saw this woman in front of me, whose thoughts no one seemed to be able to figure out. Suddenly, her eyebrows became fatter like peach blossoms in March, and her face shone with a smile. He is such an adult, and he still thinks about this matter every day. Anyway, you feed one, and you feed two. Let's just replenish him. Pei Zinan's character is naturally bad. But is it more than just bad? That's enough to describe it. Except for Pei Zulu, everyone else was just a plaything for her pleasure. What is order? What is etiquette? What is integrity? What is discipline and human ethics? They don't exist in her dictionary. What she, Pei Zinan, does is go against the grain and chaos, and everything goes according to her heart. At this time, with Yu Baiwei and Li Qingming as masters and disciples, Pei Zinan's smile was already extremely charming, and his bright red lips also revealed a bit of dominance. If you don't want to, then Yu Baiwei, don't mention any masters or disciples in the future. This may be what Pei Zinan really wants to say. The atmosphere was silent and silent. Even the little guy who didn't know what his mother-in-law was arguing with his eldest sister was much quieter. Just when Pei Zinan was about to show a winner's smile again, Li Qingming's somewhat hoarse voice finally sounded, like a drum beating in a storm, dull but powerful. Pei Zinan, you've had enough. Only then did she turn her attention to Li Qingming. What's enough? I said, you've said enough, just shut up. Li Qingming tried his best to suppress the anger in his heart, not wanting to give Pei Zulu the impression that his parents were quarreling, but he couldn't help but speak no more. When Pei Zinan and Yu Baiwei were fighting, Li Qingming had no other choice but to stop at all costs, and finally achieved his goal in a funny or ugly way that showed his extreme incompetence. But the source of the conflict remains. The ongoing dispute between him and Pei Zinan, and the unspeakable feelings between him and Yu Baiwei. As long as the two exist at the same time, this dispute will never end. You ask whether Li Qingming is decisive. The answer is of course he is decisive, otherwise he would not have achieved such a famous name. But it is definitely not decisive in all aspects. Just like when he just watched his master being targeted by Pei Zinan, he forced the latter into a corner in a few words. It's not that he doesn't want to speak, but he doesn't know in what capacity he should speak. The little guy's father, Yu Baiwei's apprentice, Pei Zinan's half-husband, after living 2 lifetimes, he still has the mentality of a man in his 20s. He has never experienced the dilemma of a middle-aged man between work and family, wife, children and parents. Just a moment of hesitation made his stupid master feel wronged. Now that he realized what he was doing, Li Qingming wished he could give himself a slap in the face, and he didn't think about making up for it before it was too late. Regret is the most useless thing. If you are wrong, you are wrong. If you make a mistake once, there will never be a second time. She is my master, not an outsider that you, Pei Zinan, can tease casually. Li Qingming emphasized. His tone was not serious, but everyone could hear the firmness in it. After Li Qingming said these 2 words, Pei Zinan's good mood disappeared. His eyes were lowered, and a storm seemed to be brewing under his long eyelashes. That's right. Seeing that his father was a little angry, Pei Zulu also shared the same hatred. How could my eldest sister, such a perfect sister, bully others like this? Auntie, you have such a bad character. The little guy also belatedly realized that Pei Zinan was making things difficult for Yu Baiwei, and pointed a finger. Seeing that he was angry with Li Qingming, and then blamed by his own flesh and blood who was born in 10 months of pregnancy, even with Pei Zinan's temper, he couldn't help but hold his breath for a few breaths. His eyes were as cold as his face. The little guy was so frightened that he dug directly into the side of Yu Baiwei's chest, drilling and drilling, like a little rabbit digging a hole in the ground. Can't see me, Grandma can't see me. The big mounds of earth were changed in shape. His mood suddenly reversed. Pei Zinan no longer had any intention of bullying Yu Baiwei, and instead stared at Li Qingming with a knife-like gaze, as if he wanted to dig out this man's heart and look at it. Li Qingming, please remember what you said today. Li Qingming paused and did not respond. How could he see his master being humiliated just to please her? Seeing that he still didn't respond, Pei Zinan's eyes flashed with darkness, and he stepped forward and took the little guy back into his arms. No. Having been brave just now, Pei Zulu was so scared now. He fluttered with his hands and feet, and then fell silent instantly when the back of his neck was lifted. He sent a signal for help to Li Qingming with pitiful eyes. Before he could say anything, he followed Pei Zinan and disappeared. The room became quiet again for a while. The atmosphere is still weird. Looking at Yu Baiwei, Li Qingming had 1,000 words in his heart, but he couldn't say a single word. Facing Li Qingming's gaze, Yu Baiwei also wanted to say something, but she didn't know how to speak. She suddenly found that she could no longer nag Li Qingming like she did before, talking about so many trivial things. In the end, it was Li Qingming who spoke first. The two of them, the master and the apprentice, finally wanted to talk quietly for the last time and explain clearly what happened in the past few years. Master, was there any injury last night? Yu Baiwei was silent for a moment, and then said as if she was anxious to explain something, no, no. With just one sentence, her eyes were already red, filled with unspeakable grievances. You are obviously the one who was hurt, you don't care about yourself, what do you care about me? Li Qingming also fell into silence for a long time. Just over 2 years ago, everything seemed to have changed. He looked at the woman in front of him who had been with him for more than 20 years, and sighed, Master, you have lost weight. Just another word, the tears in Yu Baiwei's eyes could not be suppressed anymore, and they burst out instantly. Who's calling? Who's telling you that you used to always say that I'm fat, fat? Yu Baiwei sniffed, feeling even sadder in her heart. You used to call me fat, but now that I'm thin, you say that again. How can any apprentice in the world say that? His masters. Women are really complicated. Yu Baiwei, who was full of sadness, said some more complaining words after being pried open by Li Qingming's words. Yes, Li Qingming let out a long sigh, it's my disciple's fault. But hearing Li Qingming say this, Yu Baiwei immediately refuted. Who said you were bad? My disciple, Yu Baiwei, is obviously the best in the world. Li Qingming shook his head, it's my fault. She just let you be scolded by her alone, and she didn't even say a word for you. Who asked you to speak for me? Yu Baiwei wiped her tears with her hands, but she shed more tears. If she said it, I would say it. You interrupt, what are you interrupting? You stand up for me. She will take out her anger on you again. Yu Baiwei walked to the bedside while crying. When she looked at Li Qingming's injuries, her tears instantly became more intense. Are you stupid? You must have been in so much pain yesterday that you died. How could? Li Qingming wanted to ask her to stop crying, but after thinking about it, he still didn't persuade her. In this situation, she should just let her cry happily. But Yu Baiwei seemed to be unable to stop crying. You still said you wouldn't. Blame me. It's all because I'm not a good teacher and I don't live up to my expectations. I didn't protect you well. Compared with Pei Zinan's knowledge of roots and roots, Yu Baiwei knew Li Qingming's temperament very clearly. Such a high-spirited and passionate man would never end up in such a despairing state if he simply lost all his cultivation. He must have suffered inhuman torture from that witch. Yu Baiwei couldn't help but have a tragic scene in her mind of her precious disciple gritting his teeth and holding back tears. He would rather die than obey, and even threatened death, but he was still unable to struggle. In the end, he was humiliated by Pei Zinan and became the plaything of a witch. From beginning to end, Li Qingming never obeyed. Frame by frame, it's so real, it's like seeing it with your own eyes. Pain. It hurts. Woohoo, my precious disciple. Pei Zinan, you stinky witch. Who would have thought that this, Weishuang, sword immortal, who had a high status in Zhouzhou Palace and had countless admirers, would cry like a child in front of Li Qingming. Li Qingming propped up his upper body and wanted to give her a hug, just like before, to comfort his master who was not mature at all. After raising one arm, Li Qingming stopped again. As the two of them grew older, he would no longer do these intimate actions to avoid criticism from others. It didn't matter if he was gossiped about, but he couldn't bear to hear anyone say anything bad about her master. But just for a moment, Yu Baiwei, who was crying profusely, was already leaning into Li Qingming's arms, getting his clothes wet every moment. Disciple, you have suffered. It's all because of your incompetence. Woo-woo. Not really. Li Qingming paused for a moment, then placed his palm on Yu Baiwei's back. Not really. In Pei Zinan's case, Li Qingming suffered a little, but he often taught the former to endure hardships. Or eat both. So I can't really say that I'm suffering, it's just that my body is getting weaker and weaker. But even if he dared to say this, Yu Baiwei wouldn't believe it. You lied to me. Yu Baiwei clenched her fist and lightly punched Li Qingming's back. When it fell, it was as hard as falling cotton, but the annoyance in her words was heavy and real. Your body is in such a state of depletion, and you still say you haven't suffered. Li Qingming moved his lips but could not speak. The witch must be calling you every day, humiliating you, and not giving you enough to eat, right? Ah. Actually, Li Qingming hesitated. There was a lot of bossing and bullying, but it was all done with words and hands and feet. It was really not because of hunger. You are still lying to me, my disciple. You are my disciple. How can you not tell me if you are bullied? Yu Baiwei thumped her head again, crying, but her face revealed a bit of innocence. How can a master see others bullying his disciples like this? Li Qingming sighed in his heart. He couldn't tell the truth, and he had to coax the master. He patted Yu Baiwei's back and whispered, "Disciple, I know I was wrong." But he never thought that his admission of his mistake would make Yu Baiwei cry. Where did you go wrong? Wrong, the fault is all my fault. It made this big crybaby sad, and Li Qingming was also indescribably blocked in his heart. His master was easy to coax, but because of his too honest temper, he was quite stubborn in some things. Pei Zinan is paranoid, but she is stubborn. Okay, everything is over like this. Li Qingming changed into the tone of coaxing the little guy. Besides, now that master is back, can I still be bullied? One sentence pierced Yu Baiwei's heart. She immediately stopped crying and her cheeks left Li Qingming's chest. Of course not. The goals are different, but the results are impressive. But how can people be exactly the same? But. Yu Baiwei looked at Li Qingming's handsome face with sharp edges and corners but a look of weakness lingering at this time. Her heart felt like it was being stirred by a knife. Master, when I think of what you have suffered before, all kinds of things, I can't help but feel sad. I am your master, and you are my disciple. You are the only one in the world. Li Qingming was silent again. The relationship between him and Yu Baiwei cannot be completely characterized in one exact word, but the care for each other is the only one in the world. From another perspective, they value each other more than their own lives. The big fight between the two of them was also because of this. In just a short moment, Li Qingming was shocked to realize that the gap between the two of them that he thought had never existed at all. Only, what should I do in the future? Fortunately, Li Qingming doesn't like to seek trouble. Now that his master's mood has stabilized, he can live his life as he wants. Caught between the witch and his master, it doesn't matter if he suffers as much as he wants. It wasn't until Yu Baiwei vented most of her grievances that she realized how inappropriate her actions just now were. She and he were master and disciple. How could they hug each other and cry like this? In what manner? But why is my heart so sweet? Putting aside these strange thoughts, Yu Baiwei forced herself to restrain all her emotions so that she could assume her role as a master again. From a distance, she looked really graceful. Especially the graceful figure in front of her. Even if there are 3,000 beauties vying for beauty, as long as she sits there firmly, she is sure of victory and remains motionless. But the dignified swordsman with such a posture bent down and tidied up the room. They can move mountains and seas and turn decay into magic. The level of infrastructure in this world is something Li Qingming could not even imagine in his previous life. As long as he takes out the corresponding noble phantasm formation from the storage container, it is enough to repair the house to brand new and dust-free. Only, she, Yu Baiwei, had always kept her finger on the water, and was taken care of in every possible way by Li Qingming. It was obviously a fool's simple operation, but in her hands, it seemed like she had dropped out of kindergarten and ran off to compete in the high school math Olympiad. Seeing that she had made another mess, Li Qingming had no choice but to give Yu Baiwei a step down. Master, don't be too tired. I just want to change the style of the house. I will come back to repair it in a while. It's better for master to stay in Linan City for a while. Oh, Yu Baiwei naturally didn't want to look so stupid and made an excuse for herself. I think so too, but I don't know what style you like, my disciple. With that said, she walked to the other side of the room and opened the closet first. After finally coming back, she couldn't take a look at these treasures of hers. And as the closet door opened, she was stunned by the empty scene inside. Where are my pretty little skirts? Where did it go? At the same time, Li Qingming felt a chill in his heart before he remembered that he had forgotten this. Just as he was about to speak, he heard Yu Baiwei's slightly forced words. I think it was because of the spirit rat that the clothes were ruined. Disciple, please help me deal with it first. Yu Baiwei looked like she didn't care, but everyone could see the look on her face. Loss and sadness. She knew where the clothes had gone. But how could she say it? Yu Baiwei. Since you are the master, don't cause him any more trouble. Li Qingming saw all the little emotions on her face. How could he not know what she was thinking? This stupid master of mine. Pei Zinan snatched a few pieces of clothes away from me. I guess the enchantress was just jealous of the master's style. She even wanted to wear the master's clothes, just like those disciples who were jealous of the master's appearance in the past and imitated whatever the master wore. Li Qingming did not follow the steps given to her by Yu Baiwei, but explained the matter clearly by saying some coaxing words. There was no need, and he would never tell this kind of lie to Yu Baiwei. Such words naturally sounded very good to Yu Baiwei's ears. In the heart of his disciple, he was clearly much prettier than that witch. Yu Baiwei suddenly became much more generous. Her eyebrows became softly curved, like a smiling mouth with two perfectly inverted arcs, and her peach blossom eyes were as full as autumn water. If she likes something, I'll just give it to her. Li Qingming secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Although he had forgotten about this incident, he also took remedial measures early in the morning. These masters follow their own wishes, whether to wear old or new, Li Qingming said, and took out an entire wardrobe from his storage equipment. He snapped his fingers, and the closet door opened with a sound, revealing all kinds of exquisite clothes inside. In the past 2 years when Master has been away, I have prepared many new models, and I am just waiting for Master to come back and change them. Li Qingming said lightly, looking at Yu Baiwei's dazed face. I couldn't help but give myself a small thumbs up. Who said that I, Li Qingming, am straight? As for Yu Baiwei, she was really stunned. This surprise dispelled a lot of the heavy fog in her heart. With this weak but clear moonlight, she suddenly found the way forward that was temporarily obscured by the thick fog. Whether confused or sad, after knowing what happened to Li Qingming, she was still a little unable to control herself, and trapped herself in a vast but desolate deep forest. As far as the eye can see, there is only a small empty space, and outside it is a dense fog. But now, she knows it again. No matter what, Li Qingming still has her in his heart. I don't know how deep it is. But this is enough. Since he and I are master and disciple, then as long as he regards me as his master for a day, why should I hesitate? Great relief and joy came to her heart, and Yu Baiwei's heart swayed. There was clearly a cheerful smile on her lips, but she found some tears flowing in her eyes. The words came out of her mouth and turned into her favorite title. Little Plum, don't think that by offering a treasure like this, you will forget how you scolded me more than 2 years ago. Since he decided to return to Linan City, Li Qingming didn't delay, and returned to his courtyard leisurely in a treasure boat. As soon as I landed, I saw the little guy playing in the sand pit from a distance. And Pei Zinan, who had a cold face under the eaves, turned around and entered the back room when he saw him. It seemed as if she would die soon if she took one more look at Li Qingming. Abba, Papa. On the other hand, when the little guy saw Li Qingming, he dropped everything in his hands and rushed towards him. But before she ran into her father's arms, she was picked up by Yu Baiwei. She liked the little guy, but she still couldn't help but feel bad when she saw her disciple being hit. Big sister, have you gained weight too? Only then did the little guy realize the existence of Yu Baiwei. In her eyes, her father Li Qingming was almost her whole world. Hello, little Zulu, Yu Baiwei shouted softly. No matter how she felt about Pei Zinan, she only liked the little guy wholeheartedly. Stop standing here, go to the house first. Li Qingming led Yu Baiwei to the side house. Master, I usually clean the wing here, and it was prepared for you early in the morning. The decorations are also based on those on Zion Peak. When she entered the house, she saw that the furniture and decoration inside were the same as those she had on Ziju Peak, and Yu Baiwei felt soft in her heart again. Master, please take a look first. I'll go. Li Qingming held the little one in his arms. I'll go and talk to her beforehand. Yu Baiwei hesitated for a moment, and finally nodded. When he went to the back room and found Pei Zinan drinking tea, Li Qingming said, it's a mess on Zion Peak. I'll let Master stay in the side room first. No matter what, he had to talk it over with Pei Zinan first. He couldn't talk it out now, but holding it back would only increase the power of the powder keg in the future. Moreover, Li Qingming felt that Pei Zinan must be hiding something from him. The temperament of the witch is unpredictable, but these past 2 days have been too abnormal. Let me talk to you first. Pei Zinan didn't even mean to raise his eyes. He lowered his head and took a sip of tea. He just said, Pei Zulu, tell the man next to you, it's none of my business who he wants to take home to live with. Ah, Pei Zulu looked left and right, and he couldn't figure out why his father was clearly nearby, and why his mother-in-law had to let her pass the message. After thinking about it, she suddenly became very happy, thinking that this was some interesting game. Daddy, Mommy, let me tell you, the little guy held Li Qingming's face, repeating Pei Zinan's words in a sweet voice, and then asked, Daddy, do you want me to talk to Mommy? Say what? Children, sometimes are indeed indispensable to a family. Li Qingming shook his head and said, I have to tell you more or less. Oh, who are you? We know each other very well. They are quite familiar with each other. Since they both sleep in the same bed every day, they should be quite familiar with each other, right? The little guy was passing the microphone in the middle and had a great time. It's a bed. Go and sleep with your master. Pei Zinan said coldly, but still didn't look up. Before Li Qingming could answer, Pei Zulu beside him shouted. Really? The little guy who was doing his job as the microphone looked puzzled and puzzled. He forgot to pass the message and stared straight at his mother-in-law. Otherwise, Pei Zinan's tone was cold. If she could, she definitely didn't want to see Li Qingming again. Letting Pei Zulu do the talking was the ultimate limit. That. Pei Zulu rolled his eyes, ran under Li Qingming, hugged his thigh tightly, and his voice was full of joy. Then I want to go with Dad. Not all adults can play the role of parents well. Not all children can be good babies that satisfy their parents. Life, the word, person, is always linked to life. How can one be called a complete person if he is just born but has not traveled far in the human world? In the eyes of outsiders, Pei Zulu, who often turned his elbows outwards just because he was thinking about finding Li Qingming's father's child, was somewhat of a white-eyed wolf. But what can she understand? Li Qingming doted on her, and she loved him very much. Pei Zinan didn't understand this, and couldn't even speak well of Li Qingming, so the little guy tried his best to find a new wife for her father and a new mother-in-law for himself. In fact, Pei Zulu didn't even know what those two titles meant. As for saying she hates Pei Zinan, that is even more nonsense. Children, there is no certainty at all. Seeing that his mother-in-law remained silent, Pei Zulu just thought she was acquiescing. He tossed off his shoes and jumped onto the bed. Pillow, bunny, and a little blanket. Holding the supplies Li Qingming prepared for her in her arms, the little girl didn't wrap her own blanket around her body, and stood there looking at Li Qingming intently. Daddy, I'm ready. Do you want the little one to help you take pillows to the next room? In normal times, Li Qingming might have really accepted it, but in this situation, he would rather be a loner. My father has something to do at night, so he will stay alone in the study. Ah, okay, the little guy said, it's a pity, in her heart. She was also planning to tell stories to her eldest sister and Daddy at night. But if Dad has something to do, I'll go alone. Auntie, you have to sleep well alone at night, Pei Zulu reported to Pei Zinan again, waved his hand and slipped out of the door, for fear that he would be caught and spanked again if he was slow. Without the little guy, the atmosphere in the room gradually became stagnant. The two of them looked very much like the kind of couple who often had love at home because of their unexpected marriage. Still angry, Li Qingming closed the door first, and then spoke to Pei Zinan, not caring that asking for peace would make him seem inferior to Pei Zinan. But Pei Zinan unexpectedly opened his mouth, as if waiting for Li Qingming. Angry, you are guilty of something less than a slave. Pei Zinan's expression was like a jade sculpture, without any emotion, but his tone was very cunning. How dare you scold me? You are guilty of a death sentence and should be cut into pieces. Li Qingming pursed his lips and said, that's my master. Oh, Pei Zinan's expression turned even colder. You Bai Wei as your master, so you, Li Qingming, protect her. Then I, Pei. The seductive woman's quiet voice stopped suddenly, as if she had said something she shouldn't have said. I want to take it back, but I can't go back in time. Then I, Pei Zinan, am still the master of your playthings. I am the only one who is the one who is the one who is so messed up. Pei Zinan completed the previous sentence without any surprise. Li Qingming was silent for a long time, then suddenly spoke. You don't have to be so jealous of my master. Jealous? Pei Zinan glanced at Li Qingming and sneered. Are you really in love with me, Li Qingming? You're just. Once again, her words were mid-sentence with no follow-up. Just because Li Qingming had pinched the tip of her chin, Pei Zinan's subsequent words were completely eaten away, preventing her from speaking. Being caught off guard and suffered a loss, Pei Zinan subconsciously raised his palm high to slap Li Qingming down. When it was about to fall on the side of Li Qingming's cheek, he suddenly stopped it. Then she pushed him away and stared at him coldly, but her heart suddenly felt like she missed a few beats. She actually saw a gentle look on Li Qingming's face that she had never shown to her before. It was just a faint look, but it still made her feel a little overwhelmed. What do you want? Pei Zinan shouted, hiding the panic in his heart. After the words fell, she wanted to speak again, but she could no longer speak. Li Qingming. After a while, a voice full of shame and irritation came out. You. What do you want? I just want to kiss you. Who gave you the courage? In just a short while, Pei Zinan's breathing became disordered. It would not be an exaggeration to say that his face turned red, but his face still maintained the look of disgust as if he had suffered some great humiliation. Don't think that you can benefit from me just because you look like a gentleman. When these words were spoken, Pei Zinan looked as if he was about to draw his sword and kill Li Qingming at any time. He even turned his head away, as if even looking at Li Qingming one more time would make her sick to the point of retching. But even Li Qingming could hear her slightly faster heartbeat clearly. Pei Zinan, will you die if you are not an arrogant woman? Li Qingming sighed helplessly, but he had already put his arms around Pei Zinan's waist. Pei Zinan didn't quite understand the word, but he could understand its meaning. He was very angry at the moment. Li Qingming, do you really think your master can protect your life? Let me go. If you really wanted to kill me, you would have done it long ago. Why wait until now to bring it up? Don't let go. Li Qingming directly pressed against Pei Zinan's slim figure. I haven't had all the fun yet. Pei Zinan responded stiffly, his body gradually exuding some dangerous energy. I have told you more than 100 times, you, Li Qingming, are just my plaything, Pei Zinan. Really? Otherwise, then when you saw my master coming back, why were you so jealous that you went crazy? I, Pei Zinan, have always been evil in my behavior. How could I be said to be crazy? After a brief moment of panic, Pei Zinan had regained his usual unruliness, and his tone became so condescending again. You, Li Qingming, are so wishful thinking that you actually said I, Pei Zinan, fall in love with you. Love grows over time. Li Qingming shrugged. Pei Zinan smiled coldly and was about to scold him, but he heard him say, this word is not that word. ? The atmosphere suddenly became cold, as if emanating from her eyebrows that were like swords and willows. Okay, no kidding, Li Qingming asked seriously. The secret method you gave me was the one you took from me, the master. Pei Zinan sneered again and asked, why, are you going to avenge your good master now? Li Qingming shook his head. I said I came to say thank you, can you trust me? Pei Zinan still sneered. This secret method is like rain after a long drought for me. You are kind to me. Pei Zinan's expression froze and he said calmly, I just want your cauldron to help me practice. That secret method is dispensable. Without me, I can do other things. It's optional. Li Qingming paused. Then why did you risk half your life to get this jade tube? The lie was dismantled. Pei Zinan stared at Li Qingming with cold eyes, but found that he had pressed him against the wall. What on earth do you want? As you wish, I will help you practice. Li Qingming replied. His master is easy to persuade. But this witch really can only sleep in clothes. He first helped Pei know that the Nanshi was the first Huaxian. To be fair, Li Qingming didn't have a pretentious temperament, but when faced with Pei Zinan, whom he had lost many times before, he occasionally showed the childishness and anger of a boy in adolescence. But when he learned from Yu Baiwei about the battle between her and the demon girl, which cost the latter half of her life, his mood became a mess, but he couldn't even find a knot in the rope. Because that jade tube was the incomplete dual cultivation technique given to him by Pei Zinan. No matter how stupid Li Qingming was, he should have realized that Pei Zinan took such a big risk to seize food from the tiger's mouth because of him. The meaning is profound and not complicated. Let alone him, who in the world could have imagined that the dignified Pei Zinan would do such a thing for others? Nobody. No one would have such thoughts. She is Pei Zinan, the enchantress from the demon sect. All kinds of things made Li Qingming want to have such a candid chat with Pei Zinan. But how could the witch allow Li Qingming to stroke the fox's tail? After Li Qingming exposed the secret that she had been hiding, Pei Zinan was filled with shame and resentment and pushed Li Qingming away. Oh, are you the only one worthy of being called a righteous monk? The wall is your master, how dare you do something nice? What, do you need me to call her over to listen? With that said, she had already straightened her clothes and pushed out the door. Looking at her slightly panicked back, Li Qingming raised the corners of his mouth. He still didn't know how he should get along with Pei Zinan, but this time, he had temporarily pulled the fuse from this powder keg. No one knows where Pei Zinan has gone for the time being. But Yu Baiwei, who was in the next room, couldn't let go. From the moment Li Qingming entered the lily room, she pricked her ears to hear what was going on, but she felt that as a master, she could do such a thing. The truth is indecent. But I couldn't help it. It's not that he likes to listen to others, it's just that he is worried that Li Qingming will be bullied. Big sister, big sister. When she saw the little guy with a pillow doll wrapped in a blanket, her heart skipped a beat, and she asked with a forced smile, "Little guy, are your father and mother quarreling over there?" Arguing. Pei Zulu blinked, then shook his head. "No, they were just playing a fun game with me. And I also promise that I can come and sleep with you at night, big sister." Pei Zulu raised the little doll in his hand and was a little embarrassed, "But the little guy likes to snore when he sleeps, will it disturb me?" Big sisters. Yu Baiwei just rubbed her head and said how could it be possible, but she still couldn't help but care. Your father and mother don't usually quarrel, right? And then you don't give your father food to eat. Normally. Pei Zulu thought for a while. No, right. Probably. Although my mother can be fierce, she won't deny my father food. Then, why did your father lose so much weight? Yu Baiwei couldn't help but ask this question. The two of them, one older and one younger, really had the same brain waves, and they also had a lot in common in terms of personality. Skinny. The little guy scratched her ears. She really didn't notice this, and then suddenly, as if she thought of something extremely scary, she raised her eyebrows, dropped her mouth, and cried loudly. Yu Baiwei was so frightened that she hurriedly comforted her, wiping her tears and coaxing, don't cry, we won't cry." But Pei Zulu couldn't stop crying at all, and Yu Baiwei also wanted to cry. "It's all my fault, woo woo woo. It's all my fault. I'm usually greedy. I eat this every day. It's all gone, and my father has been destitute. It's harming him that he doesn't have enough to eat and loses weight. Ooh, I'm such a bad little guy." Listening to these intermittent words from the heart, Yu Baiwei felt extremely distressed and quickly changed her words. "Sister is joking with you." But Pei Zulu, who was already convinced that he was too good at eating, which made Li Qingming become thinner and thinner, could not listen. No, it's just that I can eat too much, woo woo woo. I'm not thin. Your dad hasn't lost any weight at all. It's because my sister was blinded by it." Yu Baiwei was really regretful and explained desperately, "I haven't seen your dad in several years. I really remembered it wrong." Quote. After saying this several times, Pei Zulu slowly stopped crying. Really? As true. Yu Baiwei breathed a sigh of relief, and suddenly saw this little guy burst into tears again, almost spinning around in circles. "Hey, sister really didn't lie to you." Quote. But I. The little guy sniffed and said miserably, "But I think dad has really lost weight." "Then, let's make him some delicious food to replenish his health," Yu Baiwei said along the way. Is this possible? Is it possible? Pei Zulu blinked and forgot to cry for a moment. It will definitely work. Then, what should I eat to replenish my body? Pei Zulu's eyes rolled, and when he caught a glimpse of Yu Baiwei, his eyes lit up. I know what dad should eat to replenish his body. Yu Baiwei, who was still thinking about some magical medicine and spiritual food suitable for Li Qingming, was also stunned, and then her whole body trembled. Because the little guy had already pressed his whole body against her chest, murmuring happily. "Yes, I have to drink Nana for my father." My mother-in-law said that children should drink more nana so that they can grow taller and stronger and not get sick. If you drink too little, you will be in poor health. Yu Baiwei's whole body froze, as if there were roots under her feet, unable to move no matter how strong the wind was. Breastfeeding your own disciple. She had done this many years ago, and she found it very interesting at the time. She followed Uncle Fu to personally search for various spiritual beasts that could secrete Rushui in the realm of Jojo Palace. It's just that Li Qingming, who was young at that time, didn't like it very much and started eating rice cereal early. Now hearing what the little guy said, Yu Baiwei couldn't help but doubt herself. Could it be that I haven't fed him enough, which is why he looks so weak now? Big sister, big sister. Looking at the little guy with tears in his eyes, Yu Baiwei recovered her mind and asked, "What's wrong?" Pei Zulu waved to her to squat down, and then whispered in her ear. "Can you help Dad?" Help? How to help? Of course she knows. How could she, Yu Baiwei, help with this kind of thing? Even if you want to help, you have to be able to do it. Based on her temperament, she couldn't open her mouth to explain to the little guy. In order to cover up her embarrassment, she put on some airs. "Master, I will find some spiritual beasts at that time to make up for your father body." Pei Zulu secretly sighed at the pity. He originally thought that if his eldest sister agreed, then with his father doting on her like he usually does, wouldn't he be able to have a taste of it too? However, she never embarrasses herself, so her attention was attracted by Yu Baiwei's previous sentence. Beast milk. Pei Zulu couldn't help but make a few swallowing movements, and couldn't help but ask, "It should be very delicious, right?" "It should be delicious. Master will bring one back tomorrow so you can have a taste." But when the two of them were around, Yu Baiwei was a bit restrained. Unlike when Li Qingming was a child, when facing the little guy, she was more or less like a teacher. "I love it so much, but I can't show my lazy and childish side. What should I do if this little guy thinks that I, the master, am really incompetent? What if he doesn't like me anymore?" Yu Baiwei knew that no matter what, she was the only one outside of this family of three. This home belongs to Li Qingming, to Pei Zinan, to the little guy, and even to the flowers and plants in the courtyard. Only, it doesn't belong to her. Therefore, she was cautious again and again. Fortunately, the little one didn't have this idea. When she heard that Yu Baiwei was going to lead some spiritual beast back to let her have a taste, she was extremely happy. "Big sister, I miss you so much." Pei Zulu hugged Yu Baiwei's arm and rubbed his little face, causing a wave of excitement. It made Yu Baiwei so shy that she thought the air around her was filled with sweet honey. Otherwise, how could she feel that her breath was sweet? "Master, I really care about you," she also said in a low voice, and her out-of-place anxiety temporarily faded away. Yu Baiwei also suddenly discovered that the so-called liking does not seem to be so difficult to find the exit. But it still only seems like it. A day of rare harmony. It rained, and the sky seemed to get darker faster. Yu Baiwei didn't leave the room all evening. She just held the little one and watched the raindrops under the eaves outside the window and the butterflies fluttering in the trees. Li Qingming also came here a few times, bringing all kinds of food and children's books, just to relieve the boredom of the young and old. Big sister, I want you to read me the story of the three little bears." "Good. Big sister, I want to lie in your arms and listen." "Good. Quote. Good." After getting along with each other for a long time, the little guy also realized that this eldest sister talked better than her father. Seeing that it was getting dark, he tentatively said, "Eldest sister, I want to sleep in your arms." "Okay, it's up to you." After receiving the promise, Pei Zulu hugged the little rabbit doll and lay directly on Yu Baiwei's broad chest, moved his lips, and finally felt peaceful. She didn't recognize life or the bed. She muttered some funny words to Yu Baiwei and fell asleep early. But a thunder outside the house frightened her so much that she almost jumped out of bed. Such movement also made Yu Baiwei panic. Don't be afraid, master is here." "I'm not afraid, big sister," the little guy said with a yawn, looking out the window with a somewhat thoughtful look in his eyes. The white and purple thunder light illuminated the night sky brightly, then returned to silence like an ebbing tide, and then tore a ferocious wound into the night sky. "Sister, are you afraid of thunder?" Yu Baiwei shook her head. She had never been afraid of these things since she was a child. The only thing she was afraid of was the various strange insects that Li Qingming used to tease her. Then, Pei Zulu faltered several times before timidly speaking clearly, "Then can I go find my grandma? She's afraid." It was obviously the soft and lovely milky sound and milky breath that fell into Yu Baiwei's ears, but it made a sour and astringent fog spread in her heart, making her feel a little stiff in an instant. "Okay," but she still smiled slightly, "Master will send you back. Don't go to such trouble. The little one can do it on his own." Pei Zulu breathed out and gave Yu Baiwei a kiss on the face. "I'll come back tomorrow to sleep with my big sister." After saying that, she jumped out of bed holding a three-piece set of pillows, dolls and blankets. When closing the door, Pei Zulu seemed to suddenly remember something, and waved to Yu Baiwei and said, "I almost forgot to say good night to big sister. Good night, big sister." "Good night, good night." Yu Baiwei also responded softly. "Then does eldest sister know what good night means?" Pei Zulu asked again, and then answered by himself. "Daddy said, good night means I love you, so I want to say it to eldest sister." Yu Baiwei suddenly stopped breathing and said good night to Pei Zulu again blankly, her tone gentler than last time. "Onyang, Onyang." As soon as he kicked the door open, Pei Zulu shouted impatiently, jumped back to the bed, and looked at Pei Zinan, who was meditating on the bed with his eyes closed and taking a nap. "Why are you back again?" "I just miss my grandma," Pei Zulu said bluntly. "It's so dark and the thunder outside is so loud. What should I do if my grandma is scared alone?" "Oh, didn't you find yourself a new mother-in-law? You haven't forgotten me yet." Pei Zinan's teasing words contained a hint of bitterness that no one could know. "Why, is she not good enough?" she said again with a cold face. "Other ladies are also very nice," Pei Zulu muttered, and nuzzled into Pei Zinan's arms twice, like a kitten sleeping peacefully. When he saw his owner lying on the sofa, he couldn't help but step on it. With a lazy pace, he stretched his limbs and curled up on her lap in a more comfortable posture, snoring to sleep. From time to time, it also makes two meows. "Ahoo." Pei Zulu also snorted meaninglessly and continued to mutter. "But they are so good. The only one my little guy has is you, my grandma. The most special and unique lady in the world." Pei Zinan was just like Yu Baiwei just now, falling into a kind of stagnant silence. His heart felt soft, as if he was being brushed by the fox's tail behind him. There seemed to be 1,000 words on his lips. But when he opened his mouth, he said, "Then how do I compare with your father?" Chapter 71. Just because when he was a child, he remembered that one night when there was a heavy rain and thunder, Pei Zinan hugged him and cried silently, so Pei Zulu remembered that Grandma is afraid of thunder, and Grandma will cry. In the past, every thunderstorm night, even if he was sleeping soundly, he would wake up and crawl into Pei Zinan's arms. There was no need to say words of comfort, she just had to follow suit and pat Pei Zinan with her little hands. She had to let her mother know that she was also by her side. Gradually, the little guy developed a sense of self-responsibility. "Auntie, it's my little guy who's here to coax you." But Pei Zulu thought hard but couldn't think of a reason. "Okay, why do you have to ask this kind of question? Isn't this embarrassing, my little guy?" Grievance ying ying ying. As a result, Pei Zulu, who had been mumbling just now, suddenly snored slightly and seemed to fall asleep all of a sudden. "This shows." "Ah, Mom, are you talking about Xiami? I've fallen asleep and can't hear a bit." Quote. Pei Zinan also had a stagnant look on his face, and the soft stool that had just risen in his heart had turned into wet mud. This temperament is really no different from Li Qingming. But seeing the little guy's eyebrows and eyes that were very similar to his own, and the real sleepiness on his face, Pei Zinan's heart softened again. No matter how angry he makes himself, no matter how many stupid things he does, this little guy will still be a big piece of meat falling out of his belly. How can I not keep my mother-in-law in my heart? She didn't understand what love was, she couldn't even understand the concept of family affection, and she never considered herself to be a good mother. But at this time, she suddenly felt a faint sense of expectation. "Hey, what are you doing?" Li Qingming, who hadn't slept much all night in the study, opened the door early in the morning and saw Pei Zinan's cold, murderous eyes, and suddenly felt a little uneasy. Suspiciousness suddenly arose in my heart. I was always paying attention to what was going on outside last night. Could there be something else happening that I don't know about? Was there another fight? You lose the fight and then take it out on me. Li Qingming was at a loss for words and felt a little hairy just thinking about it. Unexpectedly, Pei Zinan just stared at it for a while, then said nothing, turned around and entered the back room again. Seeing this, Li Qingming couldn't help but scratch the back of his neck, wondering if this enchantress had changed her temper. But it was hard for him to express his doubts. Abba, Pei Zulu, who had been doing homework for a while, jumped up to Li Qingming in a few seconds. I want a hug. I want a hug. In front of Li Qingming, the little guy really just wanted to be close to him. But after not seeing him for one night, he missed him very much. Li Qingming bent down to pick it up, which was a little laborious. It was not a serious problem, but it was still somewhat weak. My little baby, are you hungry this morning? Hungry, Pei Zulu responded without thinking, then shook his head and said, You're not hungry, little guy. Li Qingming was startled again. Normally, his precious daughter could eat more than a dozen meals a day, which was not enough. Sometimes, looking at her round belly, Li Qingming worried that it would burst. But today at this hour, I'm still saying I'm not hungry. Recalling that before, Li Qingming also pinched her nose and said with a smile, Why, are you still worried about making daddy poor? Didn't daddy tell you that even if you eat a cow every day, daddy can still afford it? Quote. No, the little guy can't eat a cow. When Pei Zulu heard this, he felt a little embarrassed and hid his face in Li Qingming's arms, and then spoke in a low voice. He also stretched out his palm to touch his belly. At most, I can only hold half of it. Li Qingming was amused and couldn't help but lower his head and kiss this extremely cute little guy. Then I will take you to snack for a long time. No, Pei Zulu poked his head out again and said in a low tone, It's fine for dad to eat alone. Eat a lot and be full. The little one doesn't need to eat. The little guy usually eats so much that my dad doesn't have enough to eat and has lost a lot of weight. It's all the little guy's fault. Li Qingming was speechless for a moment. His little baby was good at everything, but he was a little sensitive, and he always had the habit of taking the blame on himself. This kind of understanding will only make him feel more distressed as a father. My father didn't have enough to eat. It's just that he's been too busy these days, so he looks a little thin. Li Qingming comforted him, If you don't eat enough, my father is more serious. I have no appetite, and I don't know how to lose weight. The more you eat and the happier you are, the better dad's appetite will be. Li Qingming's method of comfort was very effective. After hearing this, the little guy raised his head and his eyes flashed. Really? When did dad lie to you? Li Qingming hugged the little guy and walked towards the kitchen. After having the little guy, he would cook and make some food from time to time. I'm just asking you, are you happy watching your daughter eating the food you cooked and saying it tastes 100 times better than those restaurants you get outside? Anyway, Li Qingming enjoyed it. By the way, where is your master? When passing by the side room, Li Qingming didn't see Yu Baiwei, so he asked. Big sister. The little guy also poked his head to look left and right, then slapped his forehead and said, I think he went to the kitchen. Kitchen. Li Qingming was startled, and then he seemed to remember some extremely terrifying scene, and the facial features of his entire face were so distorted that they seemed to be squeezed together. 3 steps followed by 2 steps, dragging the body that had just recovered from a serious injury, with the little guy still in his arms, actually caused him to run away like a gust of wind. As he got closer to the kitchen, the ominous feeling in his heart became heavier, just because the fragrance in the nearby air was slowly occupying his nostrils. But he didn't feel happy at all. Hey, it smells so good. The little guy was extremely excited, his nose twitched, and he sniffed the aroma in the air. Daddy, are you making something delicious? Li Qingming moved his lips but couldn't speak. He couldn't directly answer the words and didn't know how to answer. The journey to the kitchen was not long, and Li Qingming soon arrived outside the kitchen with the door closed. The rich and mellow aroma almost soaked the surrounding wall wood. Li Qingming raised his hand and wanted to knock on the door first, but he couldn't knock for a long time. At this time, the door of the room happened to be pushed open from the inside, revealing Yu Baiwei's bright and rosy peach face, with some beads of sweat on her forehead. The lofty sword immortal Wei Shuang was holding a square wooden plate. Hey, disciple, are you awake? My master just made some medicinal porridge for you, and I was about to call you to get up and eat. Li Qingming put on a forced smile and was about to speak, but out of the corner of his eye, he couldn't help but look towards Mu Pan. Moment, breaking into a cold sweat. As for the aroma, all kinds of fragrances wafted out from the back kitchen and filled the whole yard. The smell alone is enough to make your mouth water and salivate. But if they saw the medicinal porridge in the porcelain bowl on the wooden plate, everyone would shudder and surrender. Porridge is already the simplest staple food in the world. There is less rice and more water. Once the fire burns and the water boils, it is ready. If you don't like the bland taste, add some fruits and vegetables to it. If you like the fresh taste, you can also add seafood, meat, etc. There are thousands of ways, each with its own taste. But looking at the bowl of medicinal porridge in Yu Baiwei's hand, it is completely green and almost dark blue. If the light was darker, someone might have thought it was a bowl of mud dug from somewhere. It is extremely viscous, and contains all kinds of strange spiritual materials, valuable spiritual insects, elixirs that can turn mortal flesh into white bones, and the bones of rare spiritual beasts. Even the heat wafting from above has a dark tone, like an innocent soul lingering around. Li Qingming was able to distinguish a lot with just one scan, but he was so frightened that he looked away. This bowl of porridge seems to have been put on a cold and dark filter, making people take one look at it and not want to take a second look at it. How's it going? It doesn't look good, but it smells delicious. Yu Baiwei was slightly worried, but her whole face was full of expectation. It must taste better than before. I'm a good cook. Things are different now. It's fragrant. Li Qingming nodded without any compliment, but remembering the time when his master had to learn to cook many years ago, he had already put on a mask of pain in his heart. Cooking is said to be difficult, but it is said to be simple, but it is very learned. If you can have both color and flavor, you can be a qualified cook, but his master doesn't have any talent in this area. Does it smell good? It's fragrant. These condiments are all treasures from heaven and earth, and each has its own special aroma. How can it not be fragrant? But the painful experience in the past was still vivid in his mind, and Li Qingming never dared to try it again. He had good intentions, but wouldn't it cost people's lives? Seeing Li Qingming admit it in person, Yu Baiwei felt a little more relieved. She couldn't help but cast a look at the little guy in Li Qingming's arms. Little guy, the master has also prepared your share. I don't care what you eat. Hello, your father used to love the food I cooked, and he said it was delicious every day, and he still wanted it. Ah, Pei Zulu, who was also frightened, couldn't hide the fear in his eyes. He could only shake his head, deliberately making himself look angry. The little guy is very full now. She is hungry, but I'm not really hungry yet. He struggled and wanted to fall from Li Qingming's arms to the ground. But master made a lot, and I'm afraid your father won't be able to finish it all by himself. Yu Baiwei was a little disappointed. Master is a little stupid, and the food he made doesn't look the same, but the taste is really not bad. As if he saw his own shadow in her, the little guy muttered for a long time and finally obeyed. Then, let's eat some. Confused. Treasure. Li Qingming screamed in his heart. He could just bear this pain alone. How could he let Pei Zulu follow him? He had already agreed. If he regretted it later, it would only make his master squat in the corner and secretly cry. Just when Li Qingming was in a dilemma, Pei Zinan's voice suddenly sounded from beside him. Oh, with your cooking skills, do you have the dignity to be called a master? If you didn't say it, others would have looked at it and thought your bowl was mud from the bottom of a mire dug out of some mire. After holding in his anger for a long time, Pei Zinan finally had a place to vent his anger, and when he opened his mouth, he made comments. She had never seen anyone cook porridge so poorly, so she added, if you give it to dogs, the dogs will hate it. Yu Baiwei was not the kind of person who could stir up emotions with just a few words, but she was still offended by Pei Zinan's words. Looking left and right, she could only bring up Li Qingming as an excuse. My disciple used to say that I did the food as the most delicious in the world. Pei Zinan glanced at Li Qingming and said calmly, I guess I haven't eaten well before. I'm really hungry. Suddenly, Li Qingming was dripping with cold sweat again. He wanted to speak and hit each other, but it was too late. Stimulated by the subtle glitches in her words, Yu Baiwei also lost her temper. That's better than you. As a master, at least I know how to get up early and prepare meals for others. That's it, it's over. There's nothing offensive about it. But what is Pei Xinan's temperament? Even if it is a hair, she has to make it look longer, shorter, thicker and more shiny. She just squinted her eyes slightly, and the atmosphere suddenly changed. Oh, when it comes to cooking, 100 of your Yu Baiwei are not as good as half of me, Pei Xinan. I can do it if I just say it but don't do it. Shu was really angry, and Yu Baiwei was slightly tit for tat. The matter was not about Li Qingming, but a real insult to her. A long while. Oh, just wait, Pei Xinan said expressionlessly, glancing at the big one and the small one who were silent. Today I will teach you what I am capable of and let you taste me. Famous dishes for clan banquets. There was a bang. The kitchen door slammed shut. Li Qingming and the little guy looked at each other, and neither of them knew how to speak. Finally, Yu Baiwei asked with some trepidation, "Little guy, is your grandma a good cook?" "No, don't make it." Pei Zulu thought about it seriously, but still couldn't remember when her mother-in-law cooked food for herself. What she used to eat was either linguo lingpao or the food cooked by her mother-in-law. Phew, Yu Baiwei stroked her chest and finally felt a lot more at ease. She just made the food a bit ugly, but it tasted great, which was certified by his disciple. Can't lose. There is no way to lose at all. After all, I have to defeat this witch. Her mood gradually became happy, and Yu Baiwei put the bowl of hot porridge into the thermal container again, and was not in a hurry to let Li Qingming and the little guy taste her craftsmanship. You have to save it for later time to compete. Ever since, he stayed outside the door and refused to leave, thinking only of winning once. The big one and the small one couldn't get away, so they could only keep their heads down. But when the kitchen door was pushed open again and he saw the so-called famous dish, Li Qingming's legs went weak and he was almost unable to stand. You two just poisoned me to death. Lose. It is impossible for Pei Xinan to let this word appear in him. I can't tolerate it at all. In the past, the reference was Li Qingming, but now he has become Yu Baiwei unknowingly. Isn't it just cooking? Is it hard? Pei Xinan has no experience in this area, but it does not prevent her from being confident. Even if she has never eaten pork, she has seen pigs running away. Isn't cooking just about lighting a fire and cooking? It couldn't be simpler. Just based on the dishes she had seen and tasted before, Pei Xinan felt that she could easily reproduce them perfectly. Even with her talent, the appearance and taste could be even better. A witch should be confident. As for what dish he was going to come up with to severely dampen Yu Baiwei's energy and teach her that she would only lose again and again, Pei Xinan had already made up his mind. In terms of prosperity, the monster clan from eons ago was really not much worse than the human clan today. Naturally, they also had a profound foundation, and they were not the mindless people that the human clan said today, who only knew how to fight and kill. Then I will teach you who know how powerful my demon tribe is. Only the finale of grand ancestor worship banquets. Pei Xinan has always been resolute and did what he said. If you, Yu Baiwei, are willing to use materials, then I will be willing to use them even more than you. Speaking of treasures from heaven and earth, does Pei Xinan have less in her storage box than you, Yu Baiwei? Oh, just wait and lose. Pei Zhananyu waved his hand, and a small mountain of treasures appeared on the kitchen table, and the dense aura dispersed. 1,000-year-old star miscanthus, ghost bone vines from Bagui Cave, ghost-faced clams from Huehan Pond, dried 1,000-legged human-faced worms. She pointed out carefully, there is still one main ingredient missing. As soon as she stood on the spot, she returned to the kitchen carrying the fresh main ingredients and put on a serious expression as if she was facing a life-and-death battle. This battle can only be won. Just spent half a stick of incense. Pei Xinan looked at the indescribable object that looked like charcoal in front of him and fell into deep contemplation. Why is that so? It's just one dish. Is it possible that I, Pei Xinan, can't cook it well? There must be something wrong with the stove. If the stove could speak human words, he might spit a mouthful of salt soda directly into Pei Xinan's face. My latest flame crystal smart stove is energy-saving and environmentally friendly, smokeless and odorless, and has large or small firepower. It is not only convenient for cooking food at home and traveling, but also can be used as a fire source for alchemy, and can even be used to kill people and destroy corpses. Are you saying there's something wrong with me? Yes, it must be so. Pei Zinan loosened his frown, and his confidence returned. The problem was with your stove, not her. So she moved to another stove. Then, still a piece of coke. Quote. How does Li Qingming do his job? The stove at home is so broken, and he doesn't know how to repair it. Pei Zinan still frowned, and couldn't help guessing, Yu Baiwei is still too clumsy. He can just make porridge and forget about it. What damage did the kitchen make? It could be anyone's problem, but it couldn't be her problem anyway. Until the third failure, the fourth failure, the 10th failure, the 15th failure. Pei Zinan still doesn't think it's her problem, but it has turned from black carbon to a slightly colored dough ball. What's wrong with her? It doesn't matter, the food is about taste but not shape. My taste is definitely 1,000 times better than that of Yu Baiwei's. Pei Zinan said to himself, and suddenly threw the satisfactory finished product in his hand into the fire. She must be better than Yu Baiwei in every aspect. How can you be so lazy? Pei Zinan pondered with cold eyes, recalling every previous operation without getting tired of it, and considered it over and over again. Finally, she pulled out a handwritten recipe book. Her lame mother-in-law forced it on her before she went out, saying that sooner or later she would be useful. Pei Zinan didn't take it seriously, thinking that he would never need it in this life, but who knew it would come in handy today. Pei Zinan briefly browsed through it a few times and raised his eyebrows slightly. This recipe, handwritten by her mother-in-law, was so detailed that even her demanding temperament found it very satisfying. Not only were the ingredients used and when and what ingredients were added in the order, but also how to use spiritual power. Control the temperature of the kitchen fire. With this recipe, why should I bother? Yu Baiwei, nothing. But no one in the world has any rules. If you follow the recipes one by one, you can make state banquet level dishes. Aniang, are you okay? Pei Zulu, who was waiting outside, was a little tired. He couldn't help but want to push the door open to take a look. After pushing it, he found that he couldn't push it, so he could only shout through the door. Don't bother me, hurry up. Pei Zulu was very obedient and ran to the courtyard to have a good time before returning and continuing to knock on the door. Aniang, are you okay now? After a while, Pei Zinan's cold response came from inside. Wait, right now, it went from early morning to noon. The little guy really couldn't wait any longer. He climbed onto the roof just now, trying to find if there was any crack through which he could take a peek. The longer Li Qingming waited, the more panicked he became. At first, he might have had a little hope, but the longer he waited, the more uneasy he became. If Pei Zinan really had decent cooking skills, he wouldn't have just randomly roasted a rabbit that year, and she would have become the shocking face of the heroine in the previous life's online novel. As for Yu Baiwei, her back was straight. The bulging chest seemed to swell again. Confidence swelled. I waited and waited until the kitchen door opened. Then came Pei Zinan's cold face. Come in. Li Qingming was still hesitating. Yu Baiwei beside him had already walked in and brought out her bowl of mud. The little guy even rushed in early, looking left and right. Li Qingming took a deep breath and walked inside to find that Pei Zinan had arranged a formation for some reason, making the room as dark as night. Pei Zinan said calmly, this famous dish is the finale of a grand banquet such as worshipping ancestors. Its beauty can only be highlighted in the dark night. After hearing this, several people actually had more expectations in their hearts. Observing everyone's expressions in his eyes, Pei Zinan couldn't help but reached out and pinched the lid of the round basin on the table, and slowly opened it. In the faint heat, a brilliant stream of light actually rose up and lingered above the head. Wow! The little guy screamed out loud. She had never seen such a battle before. She raised her head and jumped a few times, trying to catch the little stream of light with her hands. The dark kaisen is already there, another name for the ancient ceiling. There are little fluorescent spots, like twinkling stars. Li Qingming was also a little fascinated by what he saw. If nothing else, this stunt was already eye-catching enough. Does this witch really have some talent? With such thoughts in mind, Li Qingming lowered his head and looked at the disc on the table, his heart skipping a beat. In the disc that took up most of the table, there was actually a circle of fish heads with their heads raised, the fish's lips were slightly open, and the eyes were dull but reflected a little light. It's like admiring the beauty of this starry sky. Dish name. Looking at the stars, Li Qingming really broke out in a cold sweat. He thought about it a lot, but never imagined that he could see this famous dish here. The starry opening in front is truly stunning. But what's going on with your dish? It should have been a brown skin after baking flour, but it looked like a bottle of potassium permanganate had been dropped into it, making it look like jelly. The purple color is a little too purple, but I can barely see it. In some respects, the quality is quite good. But what the hell are those fish heads still wriggling with fish lips? Can they still be rescued? Why are their fish lips also purple? Could it be poisoning? Not only, looking at the starry sky, but also, Tama, is the ultimate Chaoshan poison plus version, right? Just when Li Qingming was stunned and speechless, Pei Zinan's slightly complacent voice rang out, the important meaning of this dish is that even if you fall into a trap, you must never give up. The stars in the night sky will bring you hope. Compared with those who believe in gods and Buddhas all over the sky, the demon clan only believes in the earth and stars. After saying that, Pei Zinan cast a victor's look at Yu Baiwei. When it comes to senses, she wins. In terms of appearance, she is slightly better. When it comes to style and interests, she doesn't even need to compare. I really can't lose at all. Yu Baiwei naturally knew the meaning of her gaze, but she didn't feel that she had really lost. My disciple once said that the most important thing about food is food. No matter how it is made or how it tastes, as long as it tastes good, it is truly good. Yu Baiwei acted like a teacher, feeling vaguely proud of herself. Like me, you can make food look ugly, but taste better than anything else. Yu Baiwei paused, and her chest lifted again, shaking her head. Rare in the world. Moreover, there are many things in the world that are full of gold and jade, but the outside is ruined. This sentence successfully touched Pei Zinan's pain point. She heard that these words were not only talking about her work, but also insinuating her as a person. If gold and jade are not bad outside, I'm afraid some people are stupid and don't realize it. Pei Zinan lowered his eyes and looked at Li Qingming with a dull expression on one side. Anyway, someone is here today. Wouldn't it be nice to let him taste it and judge the difference? Exclamation mark. The muscles under Li Qingming's tailbone suddenly tightened, and he really couldn't avoid it when it came. He just wanted to speak, but he also received the watery gaze from his master. Yu Baiwei also treated the Shaquan Dabu porridge as if it were a treasure and placed it on the table with the pot of, looking at the starry sky, and put. If he could do it all over again, he would definitely smash the kitchen directly. Can't you explode yourself? Li Qingming wanted to say something, but he lowered his head and glanced twice, only to sigh with his heart. The left plate is silt at the bottom of the pond, and the right plate is looking up at the starry sky. Do these teach him how to use chopsticks? It's like one is chocolate-flavored chocolate and the other is chocolate-flavored chocolate. Is there really any difference? They also have to let people taste it for a few bites so that they can tell which one is good and which one is bad. Okay, let's play like this, right? Are you trying a dish? You obviously want to poison me, Li Qingming. Seeing Li Qingming not moving for a long time, the atmosphere gradually became anxious again. Even the little guy was nervous, his palms were covered with sweat, and he was holding one of Li Qingming's fingers tightly. Even if he was as greedy as she wanted to put something strange into her mouth to taste it. With these two delicacies on the table, I dare not look at it again. It seems like it will explode if you take one more look at it. Only, I feel so sorry for Dad. Pei Zulu felt troubled and his little head was spinning, thinking about how he could help his father. How about I help Dad eat up these two pots? But I've finished eating. Can I still see my father tomorrow? I really can't bear to leave my father. This little man has not been in such a dilemma for a long time. After thinking about it, she finally found a safer way. Anyang, eldest sister, I also want to be a part-timer with my father, and I will be cut in half. She wants to help her father share half of the burden. As soon as she finished speaking, she ran over to get the chopsticks and spoon, and sat on the stool, crossing her two little feet uneasily without shaking at all. Daddy, let me help you taste it first. God knows how determined Pei Zulu was. But how could Li Qingming have seen this scene? How could he, as a father, share this suffering with his daughter? What a sin! Li Qingming felt helpless and took the chopsticks and spoon from Pei Zulu's hand. When he lowered his head, his eyes flashed with frightening light. Etc. Aren't these the treasures in my backyard fish pond? Why did you end up in the witch's basin? Li Qingming's mentality exploded. He really didn't have any special hobbies. He usually made money to eat at home and raise fish. Every item in the backyard is not only valuable, but it is also a treasure that he has put a lot of effort into raising. Was he held by a witch like this? Pei Zinan, what kind of fish are these? Li Qingming asked dully with a straight face. Where did it come from? Pei Zinan didn't take it seriously at first, but when he met Li Qingming's cold eyes, he actually felt guilty. A fish is a fish, what else can it be? Where did you catch it? Li Qingming took the opportunity to ask again. Picked it up. Pei Zinan turned his head and answered neatly, but even the little guy could detect the unnaturalness. Daddy, I know this question. The little guy resurrected on the spot and jumped onto the chair so that he could stand up and point to the porcelain plate on the table. Anyang must have picked this fish from the fish pond in my father's backyard. Seeing Li Qingming's silence, Pei Zulu felt that he was really smart. He could even guess this, and he felt even more excited. With a little finger, he introduced directly. This is the one with the biggest belly and loves to grab fish food. It's so fierce. It just couldn't find its way. The nostrils were as big as eyes. I saw it hit the edge several times. It's just a hole. Last time I had a fight with the biggest belly, I got bitten on the tail, and there's still a hole left. Quote. After introducing the fish that were still alive as if offering treasures, Pei Zulu ran to Li Qingming with bright eyes, wanting to give a few compliments. They are all those fish that you feed every day, Dad. After saying that, she did not forget to bring a bowl of water to the table. Anyang, how do you know that my father likes them the most, and you can catch them and make them into food to replenish my body? Auntie, you are so annoying. Use the big baby that you have raised for several years to escape the disaster. Li Qingming also felt that it was worth it. Carrying those few spiritual fish with purple lips, they walked out without looking back. After all, they were still breathing, so maybe they could be saved. I didn't forget to pick up the little guy who was still trying to praise you Baiwei. After praising my grandma, how can I not praise my big sister? Pei Zulu felt a little sorry to be taken away by Li Qingming. Without the big one and the small one acting as a mediator, the atmosphere in the kitchen instantly cooled down. Pei Zinan, who wanted to be better than Yu Baiwei, watched the opportunity slip away, with naturally cold eyes. And Yu Baiwei, who had finally gained enough confidence and wanted to show off a bit of her master's style, also met the former's eyes. She opened her mouth to say a few harsh words, but couldn't. This matter is extremely simple for Pei Zinan, you are lucky. I will teach you what real cooking is next time. Cooking porridge is like digging a bowl of mud. It is really funny. Yu Baiwei's chest swelled and she just said, each other. Pei Zinan was startled for a moment, then sneered, ha. Ah, Yu Baiwei responded in the same way, silently chanting in my heart. Luckily, it's you. When Li Qingming went to the backyard to save fish, he also took the little guy out to have a good meal. The first thing I did when I came back was to go to the kitchen, where I dismantled the stove and put it in a storage container. Install it again when you want to use it. From now on this home, no one can light a fire in the house except him. My waste. After working hard for a long time, Li Qingming also felt quite tired. It was not his body that was tired, but his mind. If he struggled like this every day, he would definitely die young. When he returned to the study, Li Qingming suddenly paused. His master and Pei Zinan were sitting on the soft couch, one on the left and the other on the right, clearly separated from each other. Rarely harmonious. It's just that the expressions on the two people's faces are not so harmonious, as if some kind of storm is brewing, and they are all prepared for it. Seeing this made Li Qingming feel uncomfortable. Yes, what's the matter? You and I will return to Zion Peak for a few days, Yu Baiwei said, with a rare dignified expression. Li Qingming breathed a sigh of relief, and then became serious. His master was indeed doing something like this, and he was still designated in his words. I couldn't bear to leave the little guy in my heart, but I also rubbed the little guy's head and said, Daddy will be away for a few days and will be back. Pei Zulu nodded, without showing any reluctance, and was extremely well behaved. But when Li Qingming and Yu Baiwei left, she lowered her head, and there were again wet marks from tears on the ground. Hearing the faint sobs, Pei Zinan felt a little irritated. Why are you crying? Wu, why am I crying? Pei Zulu raised his head, biting his lips in grievance, his eyes filled with tears, as if there was a vast ocean, and if he was not careful, the flood would surge into the sky. I didn't cry, the little guy denied stubbornly. Pei Zinan covered his forehead. Then why are you sad? I'm not sad. The little guy still shook his head. During the shaking, a few tears fell to the ground, splashing out a few splashes of water. I just miss my daddy. I can't bear to leave my daddy. Pei Zinan pursed her lips. She really didn't know what she was reluctant to give up and what she wanted to think about. Just as she was thinking about it, there was a tearful person in her arms. The slightly warm tears fell on her skin, which actually made Pei Zinan feel more irritable. It's the kind of irritability that comes from being uneasy. Onyang, Onyang, Pei Zulu cried, choking and his little body trembling a little. Dad, did Dad run away from home? Run away? Why did you run away from home for no reason? Pei Zinan frowned, thinking that Pei Zulu was really making a fuss out of a molehill. Because, the little guy hesitated for a long time before slowly saying, because you were always mean to me, Dad. The atmosphere suddenly changed subtly. What does it have to do with me? Pei Zinan was a little emotional, but then he heard the little man in his arms crying, Auntie, we. From now on, let's be nicer to Dad, a little, okay? Not you, not me either, but us. Pei Zinan was stunned for a long time, neither moving nor speaking. He just patted Pei Zulu on the back and said indifferently, so what if he ran away from home? She asked and answered herself, wouldn't it be better to catch him again? Pei Zulu forgot to cry for a moment, and then raised his head with a shocked expression, unable to understand what his mother-in-law said. Go to the yard next door and play by yourself. Where are you going? You care where I go. I must be trying to find Dad secretly again. The little guy was a little reluctant and wanted to follow him to Zion Peak. Seeing Pei Zinan's cold face, he obediently agreed. She clings to Li Qingming. But I don't want to cause trouble for it. There is no way to change the decision that her mother-in-law Pei Zinan has already made. In fact, Pei Zinan can't tell what his thoughts are now. She naturally knew that Yu Baiwei called Li Qingming back to Zion Peak just because the spiritual energy on Zion Peak was abundant, which was not comparable to the courtyard in Linan City. Pei Zinan didn't even want to know that it was probably for some secret method of rebuilding the foundation. That stupid swordsman with big breasts and no brains really gained something after thinking about it. Pei Zinan wasn't sure whether it would work, but if Li Qingming could recover his cultivation, it would be a good thing for her. As for why you are worried about Li Qingming, impossible. Totally impossible. She was just bored to check out the situation, and had no other intention. Flying all the way, Pei Zinan is now so familiar with all the major points of Jojo Palace that he can walk with his eyes closed. But when she landed in the courtyard on Zion Peak, she suddenly stopped breathing and felt like thunder. Perhaps no one could approach Zion Peak, and Yu Baiwei had not set up any high-level shielding formations, so her conversation with Li Qingming was transmitted to Pei Zinan's ears word for word. Disciple, are you ready? Master, I'm ready. You have to think clearly. Once we embark on this matter, there is no turning back. Even if there is a cliff thousands of feet high ahead, I will be with Master. Pei Zinan's expression became uglier as she listened. No matter how much she thought about it, she still felt that Yu Baiwei had finally revealed her wolfish ambitions. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he wants to do something evil. And with Li Qingming being such a bad guy, it's hard to say that he only accepted her half-heartedly. Maybe he was the first to hook up with her. Blood rushed straight towards Pei Zinan's brain. She hadn't even let Yu Baiwei hear that she was having a good time with Li Qingming. The result was just a moment of carelessness. Did you become the one who listened to the wall first? Master, I'll ask you again if you are really willing. I won't regret it in the future. I have no regrets. Okay, disciple, take off your clothes first. There was a bang. It was almost impossible to control himself. Pei Xinan's brows were filled with murderous intent, like ice in the 12th lunar month. Then she pulled out the Qingfang in her hand, and the sound of the sword resounded throughout the world. With just one move, the sword energy, which was as powerful as a swimming dragon, split the entire courtyard into 2 pieces. Yu Baiwei, you are in vain to be a teacher. Pei Xinan never expected it. The boomerang a few days ago actually hit me like this. She deliberately humiliated Li Qingming in front of Yu Baiwei to declare her ownership. Therefore, he cannot tolerate this happening to him. Pei Xinan was originally very wise, but once he got involved with Li Qingming, his state of mind was full of loopholes, and his emotions often expanded 1,000 times. At this moment, she didn't even think about it. I only know. Draw sword, swing the sword. But when he saw Li Qingming sitting in the bathtub with his eyes closed but his face full of shock, Pei Xinan was silent for a moment and pointed the tip of his sword at the dignified Yu Baiwei on one side. The contest has yet to determine a winner. How could you, Yu Baiwei, run away like this? Avoiding without fighting. With such a posture, it is useless to be a teacher. In just a moment, Pei Xinan changed all the words that came to his lips, making them logically consistent. No one else could find anything wrong with her. It's just that the atmosphere there was really awkward and ridiculous. Yu Baiwei didn't know Pei Xinan very well, so she just believed him. After being silent for a while, she said, I'll compete with you later. Only Li Qingming saw it clearly. It's not the first time we've met, and we know everything about it. Do you really think I don't know that you, Pei Xinan, are here to eavesdrop and then break through and run away? Master, don't pay attention to her. Li Qingming gave the order and continued to touch the roof of his mouth with his tongue, closing his eyes and concentrating. Running a certain secret method taught by Yu Baiwei just now. Just for a moment, he couldn't help but let out a few muffled groans. This nameless technique is still mostly incomplete, but fortunately, the part about how to reshape the foundation of a monk has not been lost. It also makes it clear that the process of practicing this technique will be inhuman torture, and even the soul will suffer pain like tearing. But no one can guarantee whether this technique is reliable. Yu Baiwei didn't want Li Qingming to take this risk. She wanted him to take things slowly and step by step, but all kinds of advice were in vain. Failure is not terrible, but if you have experienced the scenery at the peak of success, your mentality will be better. I will also be greedy for that past. Li Qingming also thought about living his whole life as a mortal, without even touching the elixirs that help longevity. But that doesn't mean he's really relieved. He can let go of everything else. But only, the high-spirited him in the past has been lingering in his mind. Now that he has a little guy, he no longer wants to be a mortal. Even if the chance is slim and dangerous, he will give it a try. I ask how many parents in the world close their eyes and pass away. The most regrettable thing is that they can no longer stay with their children for a while. Yu Baiwei couldn't refuse Li Qingming, but she looked worried and frowned. She couldn't help but start to send spiritual power into Li Qingming's body with an extremely gentle trend. This is also the key point marked by this exercise. It requires a monk in the spirit transformation realm to act as a bridge to communicate with the spiritual energy of the outside world. Pei Xinan couldn't help but frown when he saw this scene. Somehow, looking at Li Qingming's painful expression, she felt that her heart felt like being poked by a needle. It wasn't much pain, but the constant stinging pain still made her look cold. She couldn't help but cast a scrutinizing look at Yu Baiwei. She didn't trust her. But how could such an idiot do such a thing? Pei Xinan didn't know why he had so many strange thoughts in a short period of time. He wanted to ask something, but chose to remain silent. Then, other spirit-gathering formations were silently arranged nearby. The pain originating from his soul gradually caused Li Qingming to lose some of his spiritual intelligence. He only felt a little dizzy in his head, but the spiritual veins and qi in his body were more active than they had been in several years. Like the fertile fields that have been dry for a long time, they finally encounter the rain that lasts all night long. Those cracks also slowly softened and shrank. At the same time, a faint fragrance floated into his soul. It's not the kind of smell that can be smelled through the nose. It seemed to bloom suddenly in the middle of his soul, leisurely, like an epiphyllum that appeared briefly, but quietly bloomed for a long time. There is a kind of numbness that makes Li Qingming's soul feel elated. Etc. Li Qingming's consciousness suddenly became much clearer. This scent is not unfamiliar to him. It's the scent of his master. Different from the faint but strong fragrance on Pei Xinan's body, the fragrance on his master's body was more elegant and gentle. If we say that the former is a gorgeous rose under the scorching sun, among all the beauties in the world, I am the only one who is the most beautiful. My red lips are so gorgeous that I am stunning at first sight. Next to the latter are the peach blossoms that have not yet bloomed in March. Under the picturesque black eyebrows, the pure and elegant 9 autumn chrysanthemum blooms. The more you reminisce, the more you become addicted. It also has a very slight, baby-like milky scent. But this fragrance, why is it sensed by the soul? Is it possible that I have been craving master for too long? Ba ba ba. Li Qingming spat at himself a few times. How could he be so disrespectful to the jockey? And it's still at this critical moment. How can I imagine this? But this unspeakable wandering mind was beyond his control. And as Yu Baiwei's spiritual power continued to pour into his body, this emotion instantly expanded dozens of times. He even had the urge to press her down. Ying. What Li Qingming didn't know was that at this point, Yu Baiwei suddenly trembled and couldn't help but let out a cry. What happened? Pei Xinan frowned, with a worried look on his face unconsciously. Yu Baiwei shook her head and said nothing. Strangely enough, some beautiful pictures suddenly appeared in her mind, which made her feel wet inside. Yu Baiwei, you are Master Li Qingming. How can you think about these dirty things? You are really useless as a teacher. She calmed down and continued to run the exercises according to Li Qingming's breathing rhythm. But no one knew that Li Qingming's mind, which had been groggy just now, instantly regained its clarity, and found that with his eyes closed, his soul actually used some spying functions. Prying. It was Yu Baiwei who served as a bridge for him to communicate with the spiritual energy of the outside world. The clothes on her body made of precious materials were not hindered at all, allowing Li Qingming to see clearly. The white cat looks extremely lazy, but its movements are surprisingly charming. And still in front of the witch. It is really exciting. Wrong. Li Qingming suddenly realized a very serious problem. This technique. Serious. When Li Qingming was thinking about this issue, Yu Baiwei was extremely flustered. She didn't know whether the exercises were serious or not. She seemed a little unruly at this time. It was obvious that Li Qingming was enduring the double torture of his body, mind and soul. The sight of the curled-up veins on his forehead made her feel painful. She should have felt distressed. But why do these inexplicable emotions arise? Even that strange feeling is like the wild grass blowing in the spring breeze. Maybe the weather is hot and dry. Then the mountain fire spread quietly, from small to large, from far to near. It seemed that every night when people were quiet, there would be throbbing in her heart intermittently, making her unable to sleep. Yu Baiwei, what on earth are you thinking about? You are his master, how can you do this? It's really a waste of time to be a teacher. She cursed at herself, but she could not suppress these emotions, just like the wildfire, which could not burn away the vitality in the mountains and forests. Even if it rains heavily, it will only make the fire more intense. This embarrassment made Yu Baiwei's delicate body tremble suddenly, and she almost couldn't even deliver spiritual energy stably. His complexion was that unusually rosy, smudged like clouds. What happened to you? It was already like this. It was impossible for Pei Xinan not to notice it. He frowned and said, but the burden is too big. With her vision, she can naturally guess some of the general framework of this secret method, but as a bridge, Yu Baiwei has to do much more than what appears on the surface, and endure much more. But no matter how broad his vision was, Pei Xinan could not imagine Yu Baiwei's real situation now, and he only thought that she could not bear it anymore. Seeing that she didn't answer for a long time, Pei Xinan hesitated for a long time and then asked, "How about I come?" Unnecessary. Yu Baiwei suppressed these words from her nasal cavity. In fact, it was not unnecessary, but the current situation was already out of her control. It was originally a bridge, but at this time, the piles had been nailed, and the poured cement and steel bars had hardened and could not move. He could only follow Li Qingming's energy and let him be like a black hole vortex, using his body to absorb the spiritual energy from the outside world unscrupulously. And she is the one who connects the past and the future. Not only did he have to face Li Qingming's asking and taking, but he also had to endure the impact of the violent spiritual energy. Gradually, he became unable to bear it, and his breathing became a little faster. It seemed as if he was also experiencing some kind of torture. It's like a small boat, swaying in the storm, sometimes on top of the wind, sometimes on the top of the waves. There was also a faint blush of shyness in her eyebrows. But this situation, in Pei Zinan's eyes, was a different scene. In order to help her disciple, Yu Baiwei, the unworthy teacher in her mouth, silently endured unspeakable pain. Her whole body was filled with energy and blood, but she still gritted her teeth and persisted without saying a word. Regardless of anything else, this friendship alone made Pei Zinan feel a little uncomfortable, and at the same time, he was a little bit disgusted. If it were me, I would definitely be able to do better. Perhaps. The next second, Pei Zinan suddenly lost his confidence. Time passed quietly in this atmosphere. After a weak cry, Yu Baiwei shook her delicate body, and finally lowered her hands, but her red eyes had become moist for a long time. She didn't dare to show any abnormality, and suppressed the mixed emotions in her heart. I'm going to adjust my energy, and you can help me take care of Qingming. Before the words could be fully finished, Yu Baiwei had disappeared. A long while passed. Li Qingming opened his eyes faintly, and the pained look on his face had long since disappeared. He scanned around and saw no sign of Yu Baiwei, so he felt a little calmer. Having just escaped from that indescribable situation, Li Qingming really didn't know how to pretend to be calm and talk to Yu Baiwei. Just like those group friends on the internet, each one is better than the other in terms of perversion. But in reality, I couldn't even let out a fart. When I saw a beautiful woman on the street, I just lowered my head. Afterward, I smacked my lips and said to myself that it was a pity that I didn't take a good look at her just now. Pei Zinan paused. She never said caring words, but she still asked a question. You are still alive? ? Li Qingming slowly asked a question and looked up at Pei Zinan's still cold face. Couldn't help but let out a breath. The witch, indeed, is still a witch. A good sentence comes out of her mouth, and the style of painting is novel. However, Li Qingming's good mood at this time was not ruined by this sentence. When his body became full of spiritual energy again after a long absence, Li Qingming was also in a trance, feeling the situation inside his body carefully. Surprisingly, Li Qingming breathed a sigh of relief and said in a very light tone, "It's so refreshing." Pei Zinan stepped forward, held Li Qingming's wrist and examined it, frowning. If it's still like a mirage, how can we say it's fun? Pei Zinan was not lying. Li Qingming's foundation was completely destroyed, just like a courtyard collapsed, even the foundation was in tatters. She originally thought that the so-called secret method that Yu Baiwei treated so carefully could really make her regain her grace, but she didn't expect that it was still empty inside just with the frame of the courtyard. Li Qingming was satisfied. How can it not be fun? Pei Zinan said nothing, looking thoughtful. Li Qingming saw it and added, "Master said, this is just the beginning. It will take a while, and then you can add a new kind of natural materials and earthly treasures before you can try to rebuild the foundation. The current situation is already a good start." Li Qingming really poured out the anger that had been accumulated in his chest for many years. With the little guy who can bring him joy every day, he is gradually changing from the high-spirited young man in the past to a father's mentality. Hope is more important than anything else. But Pei Zinan didn't think so. What kind of secret treasures are needed? Li Qingming shook his head. Master said that we have raised 7,788, which is almost done. Quick. Pei Zinan was not willing to wait. In a flash, he landed in front of Yu Baiwei. After calming down the ups and downs in his heart, when he suddenly saw Pei Zinan, Yu Baiwei was also worried, for fear of being seen as something strange. As soon as she came back, she soaked herself in the hot spring pool in the backyard. How can she explain this? Pei Zinan didn't care about anything else and asked directly, what kind of secret treasure is missing? A slightly unnatural look flashed across Yu Baiwei's face. You don't need to be upset, I will naturally make all the preparations. As a master, I should always do these little things. Pei Zinan didn't believe it. If it were really convenient, Yu Baiwei would have settled the matter today. Being stared at by his gaze, Yu Baiwei was also hesitant in her heart. After a long silence, he asked, "Do you really want to know?" "Say," Pei Zinan said without thinking. Even so, Yu Baiwei still hesitated again and again. and finally, as if she had made an extremely important decision, she slowly spoke, "Others, in the name of the Master of Zion Peak, I can also collect them all." Quote. Halfway through, he paused, only. Pei Zinan was very impatient. She was extremely tired of such procrastinating people. "Are you stammering?" Yu Baiwei paused for a moment and lowered her head. "There's only one thing that I can't find in just a few years." "What?" Pei Zinan stared at Yu Baiwei for a moment. Yu Baiwei took a deep breath, then raised her head and looked through the heat floating between the two of them. The sound also seemed to become a little erratic as a result. The great demon's 10,000 years of life. With a body of essence and blood. Just for a moment, the calmness just now was gone. Pei Zinan's murderous intent was soaring to the sky, but it was completely restrained in those seductive eyes. Despite this, the spiritual energy around him gradually stagnated, and it became faintly cold. The great demon who transformed into a god has a long lifespan. Full of essence and blood. Eons ago, perhaps it was nothing. The lifespan of the demon clan is already long. Once they enter the realm of great power, they will have a lifespan of tens of thousands of years. Those legendary auspicious clans have a power that is almost as long as the heavens. But now the demon clan is dying is more than just talk. The fate of the demon clan was also chopped to pieces with a knife, leaving only a few royal families cultivating and recuperating in the secret realm. Those great demons who have survived to this day are also old and frail, and have very little life left, and cannot meet this requirement at all. As for those demon clans who are newly promoted to become gods, who is not an elite member of the demon clan and wants to sneak into the secret realm to hunt them down? The difficulty is much higher than attacking a sect in the holy land of the cultivation world, and it is no more than a fantasy. Those scattered in the practice world are even more difficult to trace. If there is any method in the world that has the most possibility, it is her, Pei Zinan. Thinking of this, the murderous intention in Pei Zinan's eyes suddenly condensed into reality, like a sharp arrow shooting at Yu Baiwei, but a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "What, you want to use me as medicine? Is this why you didn't tell Li Qingming about this?" Pei Zinan figured it out in the blink of an eye. Yu Baiwei did not respond, but fell into a kind of silence that seemed to be acquiescence. Doing and thinking are two completely opposite things. After a while, she spoke. "Before, I regretted letting you escape. The fight at that time made Yu Baiwei know Pei Zinan's true identity. When she got this incomplete secret method, she would regret it. Moreover, facing a witch who humiliated her disciple, how could Yu Baiwei, as a master, not have murderous intentions? How could she not regret this? Now you don't think about it anymore. Just because my daughter carries the blood of Li Qingming." Pei Zinan sneered and used his lips to help Yu Baiwei express what was in her heart. But then, he completely suppressed all his smiles and showed endless contempt. Yu Baiwei, if you always hold on to this idea and don't give up, I, Pei Zinan, will still look down upon you." Quote. "You want to but don't want to. Yu Baiwei will never be able to defeat me in your life." Yu Baiwei became more and more silent, but while she was in the warm water, she felt as if she had fallen into a deep pool. She was willing to give everything to Li Qingming, but there was no way she could make him feel even the slightest bit sad. Throw away everything. In her mind, Pei Zinan's role would only be that of the little guy's mother-in-law. And Li Qingming's half-wife. As a teacher, how could she do such a thing no matter how much she disliked Pei Zinan? Who loses or wins is not as important as Li Qingming. I said that was before. Yu Baiwei spoke again, meeting Pei Zinan's sharp gaze. "I will go back to hunt those big monsters that are causing harm to the people." "Oh, just what you did these 2 times. Pei Zinan was still full of sarcasm. "I haven't even found those idiots outside, and they got eaten by them for no reason." In a life and death fight, the outcome is not determined by who has rarer skills, who has higher cultivation, and who has more magic weapons. They have all reached this state, but no one is simple and incompetent, and their methods are endless. If you are not careful, you may be defeated and killed. Yu Baiwei is lazy, not ignorant, and doesn't understand anything. That's it. She paused and spoke softly but as firmly as a mountain. "Take one of my lives in exchange for another." If possible, Yu Baiwei would rather be a big demon who does all kinds of evil and is spurned by the monks, so that she can turn into that medicine with peace of mind. Idiot. Do you really think everything can go according to your ideas? Pei Zinan commented without mercy. It's a good idea, but how can you do it? 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, should we wait until Li Qingming grows old? You gave him hope, and then pushed him to the edge of the abyss. Let the wind and rain hit him, but still have some hope that the sky will clear up after the rain. You Baiwei are such a good master. The atmosphere became increasingly gloomy. In a few words, Pei Zinan tore open the many possibilities that Yu Baiwei had subconsciously avoided, leaving them to be exposed to the sun. Yu Baiwei threw herself into the mud pond again. The thick and dark mud water shielded her 5 senses, and all the complicated emotions in her heart these days came flooding back. Sure enough, she, still not a master worthy of being her disciple. The 2 women were silent for a long time. I will only stay in Jojo Palace for the last 7 days. In the end, Pei Zinan spoke first and said with a sneer, if you really want to be a good master, then come and kill me and take that medicine. Through the mist, Yu Baiwei couldn't see exactly what kind of expression was on Pei Zinan's face at this moment. When she pursed her lips and wanted to speak, Pei Zinan had disappeared. She was left alone in the mist, staring blankly at the mist. How can I be a good master? Anyang, why are you back? Where is my father? Why hasn't Dad come back yet? Seeing Pei Zinan coming back, the little guy rushed up to him, grabbed the hem of Pei Zinan's skirt and looked around. Finally, he even wanted to lift up the skirt and said, Daddy, are you hiding under my mother's skirt and playing hide and seek with me? Woolen cloth. Pei Zinan let the little one play nonsense. When she had finished playing, she lowered her head and asked, Pei Zulu. Hold head high. The little guy raised his head, feeling strange in his heart. She seemed to have never seen such an expression on her grandma's face. There was still that slight indifference, but it was mixed with a little sadness, and some kind of reluctance that she couldn't explain. If I separate from your father, who will you go with? Monsters such as Pei Zinan also ask this kind of question that adults like to ask most, and it is also the question that every child is asked most in childhood. With whom? This problem is not difficult for Pei Zulu at all, right? But it is difficult to say it directly. She rolled her eyes a few times and asked instead, why did Daddy and Grandma separate? In one sentence, Pei Zinan was stopped in his tracks. Pei Zinan was startled, and then laughed again. When had she and Li Qingming really been together? Then what if he and I are destined to live forever? Who do you want to choose to be by your side? Life and death. Pei Zulu scratched his ears. He didn't know why his mother-in-law asked such a question, but he still didn't think there was anything difficult about the question. She didn't have any clear concepts of life and death in her mind. Death probably meant running away from home and getting lost, and not being seen again for a long, long time. Pei Zinan waited quietly for her daughter's answer. She didn't know why she suddenly asked such a question, nor did she know what answer she wanted. But Pei Zulu still didn't give an answer. Auntie, please wait a moment. After saying that, she ran towards Li Qingming's study with her short legs. In a short period of time, Li Qingming's study has become a small treasure house, containing all kinds of children's things. Found it. Pei Zulu rummaged around in a cabinet that she could reach with her height for a while, and then she found a little chocolate bunny she bought for the first time from the drawers classified into several drawers. Aunt, I'll give you something to eat. Although she was reluctant to part with it, the little guy still held this treasure that she had hidden for a long time in front of Pei Zinan. What's this? Marriage candy. The little guy recalled this name that was difficult to pronounce but remembered very firmly, with a serious face, repeating the words she heard from the little girl in purple. Auntie, this is Yu, who is in charge of all marriages in the world, from the backyard of Yu's hometown. Marriage candy made from the fruit of a marriage tree. As long as it is given to the person you love and eats, that person will never leave you and will like you forever. I will give half to my father and half to my mother-in-law. As long as Grandma eats this, it doesn't matter where Grandma goes or where Daddy goes. We will definitely meet again. This is how it is in this life. It will be the same in the next life. I will always be my father and mother's little rival. A child's worldview is always simple. It's easy to cry, easy to laugh. If you like it, you just like it. If you hate it, you just hate it, and there are no boundaries at all. For Pei Zinan, Pei Zulu's words may be the correct answer she needs most. But Li Qingming, who was at the center of them, knew nothing about this. Suppressing the excitement in his heart, he couldn't help but try to activate the Xian Danju of Xian Peak. Although he still lacks the final tripod foundation, he can now use this to regain some of the strength from the qi refining and foundation building period, and can use it to some extent to perform some magical sword techniques. For a while, he was just like Pei Zulu playing in the sand pit, enjoying it endlessly. Soon I was out of breath. When Yu Baiwei saw him, he scolded her lightly. How can you be such a fool? Li Qingming coughed slightly and seemed a bit well-behaved. I feel bored after sitting for a long time, so I need to stretch my muscles and bones. How disobedient. Yu Baiwei raised her hand to strike, and the loose gauze robe on her body also lifted up accordingly. The original intention was to use this robe and long coat as a cover-up, but now it brought out her body shape. How spectacular. Li Qingming glanced at it, then took another look. Then he turned his gaze back as if nothing had happened. Go back to the house and sit down on the chair. Yu Baiwei didn't notice, and told Li Qingming to sit down, and then explored his physical condition. The courtyard that had just been constructed for him seemed to have cracks in it. If you are like this, I will never care about you again. Yu Baiwei frowned and wanted to say some harsh words, but the words came out soft and cotton-like. Okay, I won't do it next time. Li Qingming obeyed happily. As long as he pretended to be obedient, his idiot master would feel like he had eaten candy. But today, Yu Baiwei still has a lump in her chest. Do you still want a next time? Have to. The relationship is gone. Li Qingming clicked his tongue, raised his hands, and promised again and again, I will never do it again. I will listen to master. Yu Baiwei then gave up and took out a bowl of the soup she had just boiled. Drink this soup. As she said that, she stepped forward and wiped the sweat from Li Qingming's forehead with a silk scarf, just like she had done for so many years. But today is different from the past. If you want to wipe away his sweat, they are already very close to each other. And, with their height, Yu Baiwei seemed to be holding Li Qingming in her arms and pressing her on her chest. Although there is no direct contact, but Li Qingming's gentle breath still fell on her skin, very softly as a feather crossing her snowy skin. But it was like the collision of flint, and the firelight directly ignited the dry straw, giving her a certain burning sensation instantly. This feeling is so strange. It suddenly reminded her of her previous experience, and she couldn't help but tremble. The skirt of his clothes also hung down slightly. As a result, Li Qingming almost hit him head-on. It's a pity that there is still a small gap. Li Qingming felt a little regretful, picked up the bowl, and decided to take a sip. However, he squirted out all the sour, bitter and salty soup onto Yu Baiwei. He hadn't drank Yu Baiwei's decoction for many years, and he had completely forgotten all about his master's skills. Whether it's cooking rice or decoction, Yu Baiwei always has an indescribable talent. No matter how good or fragrant the food is, the taste in her hands will be extremely weird. Can you believe that this bowl of sugar water, which is like a decoction, actually has the strange smell of coffee, soy sauce, vinegar and cold medicine? Suddenly feeling burned by this, Yu Baiwei also had a face full of embarrassment. You are such an adult, do you think you still want me to use candy to trick you into taking medicine? How annoying it is to make her all wet. He couldn't help but stamp his feet and complained in a low voice, I just finished taking a shower. This chop made Li Qingming look elsewhere. He is not dizzy with 3D. But Halo 36D. And Yu Baiwei doesn't stop there. Then just wash it again. Li Qingming pulled Yu Baiwei towards the hot spring in the backyard. He had dug 2 hot spring pools back then, but they were adjacent but separated by a rockery relief. After all, master and apprentice, there still needs to be some distance between them. I just want to take a dip too. Yu Baiwei was reluctant, but obeyed. But when they arrived at the place, Li Qingming froze on the spot, and realized that the relief sculpture, following Pei Zinan's sword, could not even see its shadow. The steaming mist around him gradually surrounded him. That's all you want to do. Yu Baiwei also knew it was inappropriate. I'll go change my clothes first. Then, Li Qingming looked up at Yu Baiwei, then suddenly looked away. This shallow mist could not completely block his gaze. It was more like an extra filter, making him see more clearly. You can clearly see every stitch and thread on the clothes. Naturally, you can also see the thin layer of fine gauze soaked in the soup. Half beautiful moon. Yu Ruyu. Strict. Silk. Close. Sewing. Li Qingming swears. He really only glanced at it. Then he glanced at it several times. He only took one look every time. Who said he took a second look? What nonsense. But how sharp Yu Baiwei's perception was, Li Qingming's eyes just landed on her lightly, which made the latter's skin feel more tingling and tingling. You know, no matter how high Yu Baiwei's cultivation is, she is still the extremely lazy woman with a brilliant nature. After getting out of the bath, you can feel as comfortable as you want, and you are still in your own home. So there was just a thin lining inside, and a light gauze on the outside. Even so, it is still tall and majestic, and there is no sinking feeling that many fruits weigh down the branches. I had just been doused with the decoction, and now it was not only sticky, but also a bit cold. The coming and going made Yu Baiwei even more uncomfortable, and she couldn't help but cross her chest with her hands, which made her feel even more oppressive. Yu Baiwei tried her best to act like a teacher, calmly. You said you want to take a bath, why are you still standing here? Why don't you go quickly? After several urgings, Li Qingming also went to his own hot spring pool and sank into the water. Phew. Yu Baiwei then let go of her arms, shaking and loosening her arms, her mind was in a state of confusion. After hesitating on the spot for a while, she stepped into the hot spring, but her eyes moved towards Li Qingming, and then she lowered her head and looked at her fat-headed dragon. My head feels dizzy again. What happened to Little Plum? When I was little, I used to pretend I didn't know if I was peeking at him secretly. Now that I'm a father, why do I still like peeking at me? Do you like me this much? But I am your master. What a traitor. Yu Baiwei secretly spat a few times, her fingers pinched the hem of her clothes out of habit, trying to take them off, but she took them back again. But the fat skirt slowly floated on the hot spring water. Due to refraction, it caused some visual expansion. Yu Baiwei stroked the drum with her smooth forearm. I want to cover it up but I can't. It's not good like this, it makes me feel heavy and tired even when I walk. It's really upsetting. The sounds of distress gradually disappeared in the mist. The spiritual spring in Zion Peak has the effect of nourishing the body and mind, and under the influence of certain spiritual minerals, it has an extraordinary effect in whitening and moisturizing the skin. This is also the reason why Yu Baiwei likes it very much. Looking at her blushing face in the mirror, Yu Baiwei suddenly felt a little more surprised. There is no powder added, but it is as tender as a boiled egg. The skin is smoother than a baby's and the face is as radiant as snow. Why is it more impressive than it looked before? Could it be because of some secret technique? Yu Baiwei was puzzled, but then became distressed again, and bit her teeth. The trouble that the secret method brought to her was the only one in her life. What she blames is not the secret method, but herself. With Yu Baiwei's vision, she can naturally tell that every word of the incomplete secret method is righteous, and there is no hidden lust. The one who went wrong is probably herself. Unfortunately, this technique cannot be ended in a single time. Before the last great medicine is refined, it has to be hammered again and again, like quenching iron, to achieve the goal of firming the internal base. Thinking that this disciple had been so ignorant so early that she wasted most of her efforts today, Yu Baiwei was helpless and willing. Why haven't you come out yet? Stopping a few steps away from the hot spring pool where Li Qingming was, Yu Baiwei's eyes were as bright as autumn water. Faintly looking at Li Qingming's muscle lines exposed above the water, he was in a relaxed state, and his generous posture was still on full display. She couldn't help but look at it for a little longer. She promised that she had absolutely no other intentions. It was just unexpected that the kid who was not taller than her before turned into this in a blink of an eye. But Yu Baiwei's posture didn't look like he was looking openly for a long time. He looked more like a little thief with a guilty conscience. Master, it's so comfortable inside. Li Qingming took off the towel covering his face and said in a tired voice, disciple is reluctant to come out. In the past 2 years, Li Qingming has rarely been so relaxed. Yu Baiwei pursed her lips, feeling that there was something strange about these words. After thinking for a while, she couldn't figure out why. He could only raise his voice a little. The person who urged me to get up and do this used to be diligent, but now I feel at ease and am lazy. Just a little while, just a little while. Li Qingming didn't move. His master was not much louder no matter how loud he spoke. He was the kind of rabbit who couldn't even bite people, and it didn't hurt to curse people. Yu Baiwei felt that as a master, she really had no dignity at all. She was angry, but she was still reluctant not to get angry at Li Qingming. He walked to the hot spring pool in a few steps and said, "Just stretch out your hand and use the technique." Li Qingming felt that this was too troublesome and wanted to get up and go to the shore to meditate, but was pushed back by Yu Baiwei. "That's it, soaking in this spring water will make you feel more comfortable." She just took a few glances at Li Qingming's arms and chest, and her ears turned red. If he were to stand up. Yu Baiwei just thought briefly in her heart and felt that she was violating the teacher's rules. Li Qingming blinked, feeling somewhat inconvenient. He could still lean on the shore, but wouldn't Yu Baiwei have to squat? How can a good disciple like me, who respects his master and respects his teachings, see his master suffer like this? How about, Li Qingming asked tentatively, "Master, would you like to come down and take a bath again?" "Ding, my dear disciple sends you an invitation to take a bath together." Yu Baiwei paused and looked at Li Qingming in disbelief, trying to find some other emotions or intentions on his face, but it still had that comfortable, clean and handsome face. Squatting is really inconvenient, but this hot spring can still restore physical strength. Li Qingming really had no other agenda. He didn't like to see the temptation of getting wet. He just simply thought about Yu Baiwei. Although the effect is meager, it is better than nothing, and master will not lose his strength. Seeing Li Qingming's righteous face, Yu Baiwei opened her red lips slightly, looking like she wanted to say something, but she still suppressed it. After hesitating for a long time, Yu Baiwei still refused. As a master and a disciple, an adult and a child can barely get along, but the two of them are not much different in age. It is outrageous to bathe in the same pool together like this. When Li Qingming saw this, he didn't think anything of it and stood up as soon as he stretched his legs. "Don't." Yu Baiwei was anxious and hurriedly stopped her. The white jade-like little geo touched the water surface lightly, and the whole person fell into the pool water. Her water is rippling, and the water in the pool is also rippling, with ripples coming and going. When she met Li Qingming's gaze, she dodged her gaze again and tried her best to look natural. "Why are you whining every day? What does it look like? It's a joke." Yu Baiwei lectured in the tone of a master. "Sit tight, close your eyes and meditate." She was saying this, but she couldn't calm down for a while. Being a disciple is full of righteousness. But you, the master, are full of nonsense. Yu Baiwei, you are really unworthy of being a teacher. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.